On Her Majesty's Secret Service by Ian Fleming. It was one of those Septembers when it seemed that the summer would never end. The 5-mile promenade of Wye-les-Eaux, backed by trim lawns emblazoned at intervals with tricolor beds of salvia, alyssum, and lobelia, was bright with flags, and on the longest beach in the north of France, the gay bathing tents still marched prettily down to the tide line in big money-making battalions. James Bond, sitting in one of the shelters with his face to the setting sun, was there to spy on a woman. The sun was getting lower. The lifeguards gave a final blast on their horns to announce that they were going off duty, and the great expanse of sand was suddenly deserted. But not quite. 100 yards out, lying face downwards on a black and white striped bathing wrap, the girl was still there. Bond was waiting for her to do something. He had an instinct that she was in some sort of danger. When the lower rim of the orange sun touched the sea, it was almost as if a signal had sounded for the girl. She began to walk evenly, purposefully, towards the sun and the faraway froth of the waterline over a mile away. One might have guessed that this was probably the last day of her holiday, her last bathe. James Bond thought otherwise. He left his shelter, ran down the steps to the sand, and began walking out after her at a fast pace. Behind him, across the promenade, 2 men in raincoats also seemed to think otherwise. They both got up, and walking strictly in step, crossed the promenade to the sand and marched rapidly in Bond's tracks. James Bond was rapidly catching up with the girl. Bond quickened his step until he was only 10 paces behind her. "Hey! Tracy!" The girl turned slowly and stood squarely facing him. Her eyes, puffed and wet with tears, looked past him. Then they met his. She said dully, "What is it? What do you want?" "I was worried about you. What are you doing out here? What's the matter?" The girl looked past him. Then a voice from very close behind Bond said softly, silkily, "Don't move, or you'll get it in the back of the knee." Bond swirled round into a crouch, his gun hand inside his coat. The steady, silver eyes of the 2 automatics sneered at him. He slowly straightened himself. "Position your hands behind your neck." The silky, patient voice was from the south, from the Mediterranean. The faces belonged to good secret police or tough crooks. What enemies had he got in those areas? Might it be Blofeld? Had the hare turned upon the hound? Bond clasped his hands behind his head. He glanced over his shoulder. The girl had said nothing, expressed neither surprise nor alarm. From the north, through the deep indigo dusk, came the fast rattling hum of an outboard, and then the blunt outline of a bombard rescue craft. So they had been spotted. By the Coast Guard, perhaps? And here was rescue. Bond turned back to face the men. At once he knew the worst. They had rolled their trousers up to the knees and were waiting composedly, their shoes in one hand and their guns in the other. This was no rescue. It was just part of the ride. Oh well. Paying no attention to the men, Bond bent down, rolled up his trousers as they had done, and in the process of fumbling with his socks and shoes, palmed one of his heel knives, and half-turning towards the boat that had now grounded in the shallows, transferred it to his right-hand trouser pocket. No words were exchanged. The girl climbed aboard first, then Bond, and lastly the 2 men. The boatman whirled the blunt nose of the bombard round, changing gears to forward, and they were off, northwards through the buffeting waves. As the boat motored along, Bond's thoughts ran back over the previous 24 hours. Almost exactly 24 hours before, James Bond had been nursing his car, the old Continental Bentley, along that fast but dull stretch of N1 between Abbeville and Montreuil. He was hurrying safely at between 80 and 90, and his mind was totally occupied with drafting his letter of resignation from the Secret Service. He was fed to the teeth with chasing the ghost of Blofeld. And the same went for Spectre, the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Revenge, and Extortion. The thing had been smashed. Even a man of Blofeld's genius, in the impossible event that he still existed, could never get a machine of that caliber running again since its destruction at the climax of Operation Thunderball. It was then that it happened. A low white two-seater, a Lancia Flaminia Zagato Spider with its hood down, tore past him, and it was a girl driving, a girl with a shocking pink scarf tied round her hair, leaving a brief pink tail that the wind blew horizontal behind her. Now, with a tight-lipped smile, Bond stamped his foot into the floorboard, held the wheel firmly at 2:45, and went after her. Bond was 50 yards behind her at the outskirts of Montreuil, but by the time he was out of the town, she had vanished. The left-hand turn for Royal came up. Was there little dust hanging in the bend? Bond took the turn, somehow knowing that he was going to see her again. This was the weekend of the Clôture Annuelle. Tonight, this very Saturday night, the Casino Royal was holding its last night of the season. It was always a big event. The tables would be packed, and there would be a very high game indeed. Now he was coming into the Promenade des Anglais, and there was the Hôtel Splendide, and there, by God, on the gravel sweep alongside its steps, stood a little white Lancia. James Bond slid his car into the car park and went into the reception desk. The manager greeted Bond with golden-toothed effusion. Bond said, "Monsieur Maurice, who is the lady who's just driven up in the white Lancia? She is staying here?"
"Yes, indeed, mon commandant. The lady is a girlfriend of the house. Her father is a very big industrial from the south. She is La Comtesse Teresa di Vincenzo. Monsieur must surely have read of her in the papers. Madame la Comtesse is a lady who lives life to the full."
"Ah, yes, thank you." Later that evening, when James Bond was inside the belly of the handsome, scented casino, he paused for a moment, his nostrils flaring at the smell of the crowded, electric, elegant scene. Then he walked slowly across to the top chemin de fer table. The croupier was marshalling the six-packs into the oblong block that would soon be slipped into the waiting shoe. The croupier announced aloud and clear, "Messieurs, les jeux sont faits. Numéro 6 à la main." The chef de jeu, on his throne behind the croupier, took up the cry. The huissiers shepherded distant stragglers back to their places, and the game began. James Bond confidently bankered a Lille Tycoon on his left. One made up the cagnotte with a few small counters and doubled the stake to 2,000 francs. He won that, and the next. Now he had a fat cushion of 1,600,000. The table was becoming wary of this dark Englishman who played so quietly. There was a murmur of excited speculation around the table. Would the Englishman pocket his small fortune and pass the bag, or would he continue to run it? Surely the cards must change. And then there she was. She had come from nowhere and was standing beside the croupier, and Bond had no time to take in more than golden arms, a beautiful golden face with brilliant blue eyes and shocking pink lips, some kind of plain white dress, a bell of golden hair down to her shoulders, and then it came. Banco! Everyone looked at her, and there was a moment's silence. "Une carte!" Bond's heart sank. She certainly hadn't anything better than a 5. The Lille banker turned his up. 7. And now he scrabbled out a card for her and flicked it contemptuously across. The croupier delicately faced her other two cards with the tip of his spatula. A 4. She had lost. The girl was whispering urgently to the chef de jeu. He was shaking his head. Sweat was beading on his cheeks. In the silence that had fallen round the table, Bond heard the chef de jeu say firmly, "Je regrette, madame. Il faut vous arranger la caisse." And now that most awful of all whispers in a casino was running among the watchers and the players like a slithering reptile. Le coup du déshonneur. C'est le coup du déshonneur. Oh, my God, thought Bond. She's done it. She hasn't got the money, and for some reason she can't get any credit at the caisse. Bond knew of the stigma the girl would carry for the rest of her life. It would be the end of her casino life in France, in Italy, probably also in Germany, Egypt, and England. Not caring about the social ostracism, thinking only about the wonderful girl who had outdriven him, James Bond leaned slightly forward. He tossed 2 of the precious pearly plaques into the center of the table. He said with a slightly bored, slightly puzzled intonation, "Forgive me, Madame has forgotten that we agreed to play in partnership this evening," and not looking at the girl, but speaking with authority to the chef de jeu. "I beg your pardon. My mind was elsewhere. Let the game continue." The tension round the table relaxed. The chef de jeu had surreptitiously wiped a handkerchief across his face. The croupier had raised his head, which previously had seemed to be bowed under some kind of emotional guillotine. And now the old pattern had re-established itself. "La partie continue. Un banco de 40,000. The girl was sitting by herself in the bar, with a bottle of Bollinger in front of her, staring moodily at nothing. She barely looked up when Bond slipped into the chair next to hers. She gave him a sideways, appraising glance. "Why did you rescue me when I made the coup du déshonneur?" Bond shrugged. "Beautiful girl in distress. Besides, we made friends between Abbeville and Montreuil this evening, but I don't think you would have tossed me if I'd been paying attention." Vivacity came into her face and voice. "Oh, yes, I'd have beaten you anyway. I'd have passed you in the villages. Besides," there was an edge of bitterness in her voice, "I would always be able to beat you. You want to stay alive." Bond chose to let the remark lie. "My name is Bond, James Bond. Please stay alive, at any rate for tonight." "My name is Tracy. That is short for all the names you were told at the reception in the hotel. Teresa was a saint. I am not a saint. The manager told me of your inquiries. So shall we go now? I am not interested in conversation, and you have earned your reward." She rose abruptly. So did Bond, confused. "No, I will go alone. You can come later. The number is 45. There, if you wish, you can make the most expensive piece of love in your life. It will have cost you 40 million francs. I hope it will be worth it." She was waiting in the big double bed, a single sheet pulled up to her chin. The fair hair was spread out like golden wings, and her blue eyes blazed. Bond locked the door behind him and came over and sat on the edge of her bed and put one hand firmly on the little hill that was her left breast. "Now listen, Tracy," he began, but the girl reached up a swift hand that smelt of Galin odes and put it across his lips. "I said, no conversation. Take off those clothes. Make love to me. You are handsome and strong. I want to remember what it can be like. Do anything you like. Take me." At 8 o'clock the next morning he woke her, and it was the same glorious thing again. But after, when they should have been making plans about the day, about where to have lunch, when to bathe, she was at first evasive, and then, when he pressed her, childishly abusive. "Get to hell away from me. You had what you wanted. Now get out." "Wasn't it what you wanted too?" "No. You lousy goddamn lover. Get out." Bond recognized the edge of hysteria, at least of desperation. He dressed slowly. Bond felt a wave of affection for her, a sweeping urge to protect her. With his hand on the doorknob, he said softly, "Tracy, let me help you. You've got some troubles. It's not the end of the world. So have I. So has everyone else. Go to hell!" He went off down the corridor, feeling, for the first time in his life, totally inadequate. Bond sat gazing out of his window, chain-smoking and looking down at the little white car that was now not far from his in the parking lot. Somehow he must stick close to her, watch over her. As a first step, he rang down to the concierge and ordered a drive-yourself Simca Arond. Bond shaved and dressed and watched the entrance and the little white car until 4:30 in the afternoon. Then, at last, she appeared in the black and white striped bathing wrap, and Bond ran down the corridor to the lift. It was not difficult to follow her as she drove along the promenade and left her car in one of the parking lots, and it was also no problem for the little anonymous Citroën that followed Bond. And then had been set up the train of the watchers and the watched, which was now drawing to its mysterious climax as the little bombard thrashed its way up the River Royale under the stars. What to make of it all? Had she been a witting or unwitting bait? Was this a kidnapping? If so, of one or of both? Bond was still raking his mind for clues when the helmsman turned the bombard in a wide curve across the current towards a battered skeletal jetty that projected from the muddy bank into the stream. He pulled up under its lee. A powerful flashlight shone down on them out of the darkness. A rope clattered down, and the boat was hauled to the foot of the muddy wooden steps. They got out, and the bombard backed quickly away and continued upriver. There were two more men, of much the same build as the others on the jetty. No words were spoken as the girl and Bond were escorted up the small dust road that led away from the jetty through the sand dunes. 100 yards from the river, tucked away in a gully between tall dunes, there was one of those giant corrugated aluminum transport trucks. As they approached, an oblong of yellow light promptly blazed as the caravan-like door in the rear was thrown open. Inside there were folded chairs and the signs of a disturbed game of cards. This was presumably used as the guard room. Then on both sides the doors of cabins. Tracy was waiting at one of those doors. The single man with the gun who was following him said impatiently, "Allez!" Bond wondered whether to jump him, but behind the other 3 men stood watching. Bond contented himself with a mild "Merde à vous!" and went ahead to the aluminium door that presumably sealed off the forward compartment in this strange vehicle. Behind this door lay the answer. It was probably one man, the leader. This might be the only chance. Bond's right hand was already grasping the hilt of his knife in his trouser pocket. Now he put out his left hand and in one swirl of motion leaped through, kicked the door shut behind him and crouched, the knife held for throwing. Behind him he felt the guard throw himself for the door, but Bond had his back to it and it held. The man 10 feet away behind the desk, within easy range for the knife, called out something, an order. A cheerful, gay order in some language Bond had never heard. The pressure on the door ceased. The man smiled a wide, a charming smile that cracked his creased walnut of a face in two. He got to his feet and slowly raised his hands. "I surrender, but do not kill me, I beg of you. At least not until we've had a stiff whiskey and soda and a talk. Then I will give you the choice again, okay?" He came out from behind his desk, a smallish, middle-aged man with a brown, crinkled face. The man held out a hand. It was warm and firm and dry. "Marcus Draco is my name. You have heard of it?" "No." "Ha! But I have heard of yours. It is Commander James Bond. You are an important member of our Majesty's Secret Service." The impish face creased with delight. "Yes? What makes you think so?" The man didn't answer. He said, Come and sit down. I have much to talk to you about. But first, the whiskey and soda, yes?" He indicated a comfortable armchair across the desk from his own and took out a bottle of bourbon, 2 pint glasses, a bucket of ice cubes, a siphon of soda, and a flagon of iced water. Then, while Bond poured himself a stiff bourbon and water with plenty of ice, he sat down across the desk from Bond.
"I learned who you are from a good friend in the 12e in Paris. He is paid to give me such information when I want it. I am in the opposite camp to yourself. Not directly opposite. Let us say at a tangent on the field."
He paused. He lifted his glass. He said with much seriousness, "I am the head of the Iron Corse." Good God! The plot was indeed thickening. Bond concealed his surprise. The Iron Corse, more deadly and perhaps even older than the Unione Siciliano, the Mafia. He knew that it controlled most organized crime throughout metropolitan France and her colonies. Marc-Ange said, "My dear Commander, what we discuss must remain between us." Bond said, "If you tell me secrets that affect my profession, I will have to pass them on."
"That I fully comprehend. What I wish to discuss is a personal matter. It concerns my daughter, Teresa."
Bond said, "Then I agree."
"Thank you. You are a man to trust. You would have to be in your profession, but I see it also in your face. My wife died 10 years ago, and I had the girl's education finished in Switzerland. I was already rich, and at that time I was elected capo, that is, chief of the Corsican Union, and became infinitely richer. I gave the girl all she wanted. But she was a wild one, without a proper supervision. She was already getting in and out of scrapes and scandals, and when I remonstrated with her, cut off her allowance, she would commit some even grosser folly to spite me, I suppose. And yet, all the while, behind her bravado, the worm of self-destruction had somehow got a hold inside her, and behind the wild playgirl facade was eating away what I can only describe as her soul."
He looked at Bond.
She made what I now see was a desperate attempt to get back on the rails, so to speak. She went off without telling me and married, perhaps, with the idea of settling down. But the man, a worthless Italian called Vincenzo, Count Giulio di Vincenzo, took as much of her money as he could lay hands on and deserted her, leaving her with a girl child. I purchased a divorce and bought a small chateau for my daughter in the Dordogne and installed her there. And for once, with the baby and a pretty garden to look after, she seemed almost at peace. And then, my friend, 6 months ago, the baby died. Died of that most terrible of all children's ailments, spinal meningitis. After the tragedy, she disappeared. She took her jewels and went off in that little car of hers, and I heard occasional news of her selling the jewels and living furiously all over Europe. Naturally, I followed her, had her watched when I could, but she avoided all my attempts to meet her and talk to her. Then I heard from one of my agents that she had reserved her room here at the Splendide for last night, and I hurried down from Paris.
He waved a hand.
In this, because I had a presentiment of tragedy. You see, this was where we had spent the summers in her childhood, and she had always loved it. She is a wonderful swimmer, and she was almost literally in love with the sea. And when I got the news, I suddenly had a dreadful memory. The memory of a day when she had been naughty and had been locked in a room all afternoon instead of going bathing. That night, she had said to her mother quite calmly, "You made me very unhappy keeping me away from the sea. One day, if I get really unhappy, I shall swim out into the sea, down the path of the moon or the sun, and go on swimming until I sink." So there.
My mother told me the story, and we laughed over it together, the childish tantrum. But now I suddenly remembered again the occasion, and it seemed to me that the childish fantasy might well have stayed with her, and that now, wanting to put an end to herself, she had resurrected it, and was going to act on it. He reached to the top drawer of his desk, took out a sheet of writing paper, and passed it over to Bond. "And now, if you read that, you will agree with me. Read it, please." Bond took the letter. "Dear Papa, I am sorry, but I have had enough. It is only sad because tonight I met a man who might have changed my mind. He is an Englishman called James Bond. Please find him and pay him 20,000 francs, which I owe him, and thank him from me. This is nobody's fault but my own. Goodbye, and forgive me. Tracy." Bond slid the letter back to him across the desk. He took a deep drink of the whiskey and reached for the bottle. He said, "Yes, I see." "Come on there, Bond, my friend. You have heard the whole story, and now you have seen the evidence. Will you help me? It is my only chance that you will give her a reason to live," he said, holding Bond's eyes. "I wish you to pay court to my daughter and marry her. On the day of the marriage, I will give you a personal dowry of 1,000,000 pounds in gold." James Bond exploded angrily. "What you ask is utterly impossible. The girl is sick. What she needs is a psychiatrist, not me. And I do not want to marry, not anyone. Nor do I want 1,000,000 pounds. I have enough money for my needs. You must understand all this. She is a wonderful girl. I will do all I can for her, but only when she is well again. And I would certainly like to see her again, very much." He pleaded with Marc-Ange. "You do understand, don't you, Marc-Ange?" The man said resignedly, "I understand you, my friend, and I will not importune you with further arguments, but will you please do one further favor for me? It is now 9 o'clock. Will you please take her out to dinner tonight? If only you can persuade her that you would like to see her again, I think I may be able to do the rest. Will you do this for me?" Bond smiled with all the warmth he could summon. "But of course, I would love to do that. But I am booked on the first morning flight from Le Touquet tomorrow morning. Will you be responsible for her from then?" "Certainly, my friend. Of course I will do that." Marc-Ange brusquely wiped a hand across his eyes. "My dear friend, is there anything in this world that I can do for you now, at this moment? I have great resources, great knowledge, great power. They are all yours. Is there nothing I can do for you?" Bond had a flash of inspiration. He smiled broadly. "There is a piece of information I want. There's a man called Blofeld, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. You will have heard of him. I wish to know if he is alive and where he is to be found." "Aha," he said thoughtfully. "The Blofeld. Yes, he is certainly alive. Only recently he suborned 3 of my men, bribed them away from the Union. He has done this to me before. 3 members of the old Spectre were taken from the Corsican Union." He spread his hands apologetically. "All we know is that he is in Switzerland. We have no exact address for him. Will that help? Surely your men there can find him." "That's wonderful, Marc-Ange. The rest shouldn't be difficult. We have good friends in Switzerland." Marc-Ange smiled happily at Bond's reaction. He said seriously, "But if things go wrong for you in this case or in any other way, you will come at once to me, yes?" Bond smiled. Marc-Ange said diffidently, "Now, may I bring in Teresa? She does not know what we have been discussing. Let us say I have been making a private deal with you. He got up and came over to Bond and put his hand on Bond's shoulder.
"And thank you. Thank you for everything."
Then he went out of the door.
"Oh, my God," thought Bond. "Now for my side of the bargain."
It was 2 months later in London, and James Bond was driving lazily up from his Chelsea flat to his headquarters. Bond had nothing on his mind except the frustration of waiting for Station Z to somehow come up with the exact address of Blofeld. But their friends in Zurich were continuing to prove obstinate. There was no trace of any man called Blofeld in the whole of Switzerland, nor was there any evidence of the existence of a reborn spectre on Swiss soil. Bond wondered if he should get in touch with Margage, but he shied away from this course of action, which would surely have as one consequence the reopening of the case of Tracy. And that corner of his life, of his heart, he wanted to leave undisturbed for the time being. Their last evening together had passed quietly, almost as if they had been old friends, old lovers. Bond had said that Universal Export was sending him abroad for some time. They would certainly meet when he returned to Europe. The girl had accepted this arrangement. She herself had decided to go away for a rest. She had been doing too much. She had been on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She would wait for him. Perhaps they could go skiing together around Christmas time. Bond had been enthusiastic. It was at this moment in his reflections that the synchrophone in his trouser pocket began to bleep. Bond accelerated out of the park and drew up beside the public telephone booth at Marble Arch. The synchrophone was a light plastic radio receiver about the size of a pocket watch. When an officer was bleeped on the receiver, it was his duty to go at once to the nearest telephone and contact his office. He was urgently needed. Bond rang his exchange on the only outside number he was allowed to use, said, 007 reporting, and was at once put through to his secretary. She was a new one, Mary Goodnight, and she was a honey.
"Good morning, Goodnight. What can I do for you? Is it war or peace?"
She giggled unprofessionally.
"It sounds fairly peaceful. You're to go at once to the College of Arms and ask for Sable Basilisk. Apparently they've got some kind of a line on Bedlam."
Bedlam was the code name for the pursuit of Blofeld. Bond said respectfully,
"Have they indeed? Then I'd better get cracking. Goodbye, Goodnight."
He heard her giggle before he put the receiver down. The College of Arms is a pleasant little Queen Anne backwater in ancient red brick with white-sashed windows and a convenient cobbled courtyard where Bond parked his car. He went through the door into a large, gloomy hall. Bond asked for the Sable Basilisk and confirmed that he had an appointment.
Yes, sir. This way, please, sir."
James Bond was conducted through the musty corridors. He was shown into a light, clean, pleasantly furnished room with attractive prints on the walls and meticulous order among its books. A young man a few years younger than Bond got up and came across the room to meet him.
"Commander Bond?"
The handshake was brief and firm.
"I've been expecting you.
"First of all,"
he looked Bond very straight in the eye,
I gather that this is an intelligent matter of some kind. I did my national service with intelligence in BAOR, so please don't worry about security."
"So far as security is concerned, I'm sure we can be open with each other. Now, this man Blofeld, how did you come to hear of him? Every detail, please. Everything about him is important."
"Yes,"
he said thoughtfully.
"I thought this might be the same chap when I got a lot of urgent calls from the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defense yesterday. In June last, the 10th, we got this confidential letter from a firm of respectable Zurich solicitors dated the day before. I'll read it out. On it says, we have a valued client by the name of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. This gentleman styles himself Monsieur le Comte Balthazar de Bleuville, in the belief that he is the rightful heir to this title, which we understand to be extinct. His belief is based on stories he heard from his parents in childhood, to the effect that his family fled France at the time of the Revolution, settled in Germany under the adopted name of Blofeld, assumed in order to evade the revolutionary authorities and safeguard their fortune, which they had sequestered in Augsburg, and subsequently migrated to Poland. Our client is now anxious to have these facts established in order legally to obtain right to the de Bluville title, supported by an acte de notoriété, which would in due course receive the stamp of approval of the Ministère de la Justice in Paris. In the meantime, our client proposes to continue to adopt, albeit provisionally, the title of Comte de Bluville. We understand that you, honored sirs, are the only body in the world who is capable of undertaking this research work, and we have been instructed to get in touch with you under the strictest conditions of confidence, which, in view of the social aspects involved, we think we have the right to request. The financial standing of our client is impeccable, and expense is no object in this matter. As a preliminary honorarium, and upon acceptance of this commission, we propose a payment of £1,000 sterling to your account in such bank as you may designate. Awaiting the favour of an early reply, we remain, honoured sirs, etc., 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 Gebr. Gumpold Moosbrugger, Advokaten, Bahnhofstrasse, Zurich.
Sable Basilisk looked up. James Bond's eyes were glittering with excitement. He said urgently, "So, what happened? Have you kept the contact?"
"Oh, yes, but rather tenuously, I'm afraid. Of course, I wrote at once accepting the commission. The first thing I had to ask for was the man's birth certificate, and after a delay, I was told that it had been lost, and that I was on no account to worry about it. The Count had in fact been born in Gdynia of a Polish father and a Greek mother. I have the names here, on May 28th, 1908. Could I not pursue my researches backwards from the de Bluville end? I replied, temporizing, but by this time I had indeed established from our library that there had been a family of the de Bluvilles, at least as lately as the 17th century.
Sable Basilisk paused.
This, of course, he must have known for himself. There would have been no purpose in inventing a family of de Bluvilles and trying to stuff them down our throats. I told the lawyers of my discovery, and in my summer holidays I motored down there and sniffed around, but meanwhile I had, as a matter of routine, written to our ambassador in Warsaw and asked him to contact our consul in Gdynia and request him to employ a lawyer to make the simple researches with the registrar and the various churches where Blofeld might have been baptized. The reply early in September was surprising. The pages containing the record of Blofeld's birth had been neatly cut out. I kept this information to myself, that is to say, I did not pass it on to the Swiss lawyers because I had been expressly instructed to make no inquiries in Poland. Meanwhile, I had carried out similar inquiries to a lawyer in Augsburg. There was indeed a record of Blofeld's, but a profusion of them. For it is a fairly common German name, and in any case nothing to link any of them with the de Bluvilles. So I was stumped, but no more than I have been before, and I wrote a neutral report to the Swiss lawyers and said that I was continuing my researches. And there,
Sable Basilisk slapped the file shut.
Until my telephone began ringing yesterday, the case rests.
Bond scratched his head thoughtfully. But the ball's still in play.
Oh, yes, definitely. I take it you haven't got Blofeld's present address?
Sable Basilisk shook his head.
Then would there be any conceivable excuse for an envoy from you?
Bond smiled. Me, for example, to be sent out from the college to have an interview with Blofeld. Some tricky point that cannot be cleared up by correspondence, something that needs a personal inquiry from Blofeld.
Well, yes, there is, in a way.
Sable Basilisk looked rather dubious.
You see, in some families there is a strong physical characteristic that goes on inevitably from generation to generation. When I was scratching around in the old Bluville tombs, my flashlight, moving over the stone faces, picked out a curious fact. None of the de Bluvilles, as far as I could tell, had lobes to their ears.
Ah, said Bond. So he shouldn't by rights have lobes to his ears. Well, he has got lobes, said Bond, annoyed. Where does that get us?
To begin with, added to what I know anyway, that makes him probably not a debile. But after all, there's no reason why he should know what physical characteristic we're looking for in this interview.
You think we could set one up?
Don't see why not.
If Blofeld agreed to see me, how in hell could I play the part? What's my story to Blofeld? Who am I exactly?
Oh, that'll be all right. I'll coach you in all the dope about the Debiles. You can easily mug up a few popular books on heraldry. It's not difficult to be impressive on the subject. Very few people know anything about it.
Maybe. But this Blofeld is a pretty smart animal. He'll want a lot of credentials before he sees anyone but his lawyer and his banker. Who exactly am I?
You think Blofeld's smart because you've seen the smart side of him, but he has already swallowed the bait. He may be tough and ruthless in his corner of human behavior. He's a rich and successful man in his line of business, no matter what it is. He no longer admires the material things, riches and power. He's now 54, as I reckon it. He wants a new skin. Now he has thought up this way of buying himself a new identity. If you ask me, we must help the hair to grow and flourish on his heel of Achilles until it is so luxuriant that he trips on it. And who the hell are you supposed to be?
M more or less repeated Bond's question when that evening he looked up from the last page of the report that Bond had spent the afternoon dictating to Mary Goodnight. I'm to be an emissary from the College of Arms, sir. This basilisk chap recommended that I should have some kind of a title, the sort of rather highfalutin one that would impress a man with this kind of bee in his bonnet. I've put down there the arguments of this chap, and they make a lot of sense to me. Snobbery's a real Achilles heel with people. Blofeld's obviously got the bug badly. I think we can get to him through it.
All right, then. What's this ridiculous title to be? And what happens next?
Well, sir, it seems there's a chap called Sir Hilary Bray, friend of sable basilisks, about my age and not unlike me to look at, family tree as long as your arm. Well, sable basilisk says he can fix it with him. This man's got a good war record and sounds a reliable sort of chap. He lives in some remote glen in the Highlands, watching birds and climbing the hills with bare feet. Never sees a soul. No reason why anyone in Switzerland should have heard of him. Bond's voice became defensive, stubborn. Well, sir, the idea is that I should be him.
Sir Hilary Bray, eh?
M tried to conceal his scorn.
And then what do you do? Run around the Alps waving this famous banner of his?
Bond said patiently, obstinately, refusing to be browbeaten. First, I'll get passport control to fix up a good passport. Then, if Blofeld takes the bait, I go out to Switzerland with all the right books and suggest that I work out his de Bleville pedigree with him.
Then what?
Then I try and winkle him out of Switzerland. Get him over the frontier to somewhere where we can do a kidnap job on him. But I haven't worked out all the details yet, sir. Had to get your approval. And then Sable Basilisk has got to make up a damned attractive fly and throw it over these Zurich solicitors. M wearily pushed the file over to Bond.
Take it away.
M shook his head skeptically.
Sir Hilary Bray. Yeah. Oh, well, tell the Chief of Staff I approve. But reluctantly.
That's all, 007. Thank you, sir. Good night. Bond went out and softly closed the door behind him. So, as November blustered its way into December, James Bond swatted up heraldry at his desk, picking up scraps of medieval French and English and picking the brains of Sable Basilisk. Meanwhile, the highly delicate correspondence between Sable Basilisk and the Gebruder Mosbrugger proceeded haltingly and at a snail's pace. They posed countless questions about Sir Hilary Bray. Photographs were asked for, and suitably doctored were provided. His whole career since his school days had to be detailed and was sent down from Scotland with a highly amused covering note from the real man. To test the market, more funds were asked for by Sable Basilisk, and with encouraging promptitude were forthcoming in the shape of a further £1,000. When the check arrived on December 15th, Sable Basilisk telephoned Bond delightedly.
"We've got him," he said. "He's hooked."
And sure enough, the next day came a letter from Zurich to say that their client agreed to a meeting with Sir Hilary. The last few days were spent in a flurry of meetings, with the Chief of Staff presiding at headquarters. The main decisions were that Bond should go to the meeting with Blofeld absolutely clean. He would carry no weapons, no secret gear of any kind, and he would not be watched or followed by the service in any way. He would communicate only with Sable Basilisk. Security precautions would include keeping Station Z completely in the dark about Bond's mission to Switzerland and a closure of the Bedlam file at headquarters. Instead, a new code word for the operation, known only to an essential handful of senior officers, would be issued. It would be Corona. The next day, when Bond arrived at the Zurich airport, a woman was standing beside the reception counter. As soon as Bond appeared in the entrance, she came forward.
"Sir Hilary Bray?"
"Yes?"
"I am Fräulein Irma Bunt, personal secretary to the Count. Good afternoon. I hope you had a happy flight."
She had a square, brutal face with hard, yellow eyes. Her strong, short body was dressed in unbecomingly tight trousers, topped by a gray wind jacket, ornamented over the left breast with a large red G, topped by a coronet. He said, "Yes, it was very pleasant."
"You have your baggage check. Will you follow me, please? And first your passport. This way."
Bond followed her through the passport control and out into the customs hall.
"You speak German?"
"No, I'm afraid not."
"French, perhaps?"
"Oh, a little. Enough for my work."
"Ah, yes. That is important, yes?"
Bond's suitcase was unloaded off the trolley onto the barrier. The woman flashed some kind of a pass at the customs officer. It was very quickly done, but Bond caught a glimpse of her photograph in the heading Bundespolizei. So Blofeld had got the fix in. The officer said deferentially, "Bitte sehr." A porter took it, and they walked across to the entrance. When they came out on the steps, an anonymous black Mercedes 300 SE saloon slid to a stop beside them. Bond's suitcase was put in the boot, and they moved off fast in the direction of Zurich. The car came up to hangars and drove slowly between them and pulled up beside a bright orange helicopter that had a red G with a coronet in its fuselage.
"You have traveled in one of these machines before?" "No? It is very pleasant. One obtains a fine view of the Alps."
Fräulein Bunt's eyes were blank with disinterest. They climbed up the aluminium ladder. Bond's suitcase was handed up by the chauffeur. Fräulein Bunt's eyes were blank with disinterest. They climbed up the aluminium ladder. Bond's suitcase was handed up by the chauffeur. It was a 6-seater, luxurious in red leather. Above and in front of them, the pilot lifted a thumb. There was a slight jolt, and then they were climbing fast. Bond leaned sideways and said loudly against the rattle of the machine, "Where are we heading for?" Irma pretended not to hear. Bond repeated his question, shouting it.
"Into the Alps, into the high Alps," shouted the woman.
She waved towards the window.
"It is very beautiful. You like the mountains?"
"I love them," shouted Bond. "Just like Scotland." He leaned back in his seat, lit a cigarette, and looked out of the window. They were flying at about 2,000 feet. That forest of lights away to starboard must be St. Moritz. Now where? Bond buried himself in his paper. A slight veer to port. More lights. Pontresina? And now the radio began to crackle and the seatbelt sign went up. Below, the ground was mostly in darkness, but ahead the giant peaks were still golden in the dying sun. They were making straight for one of them, for a small plateau near its summit. They were in the Langard range, somewhere above Pontresina in the Engadine. Irma Bunt gave her box-like smile.
"We have arrived,"
she said unnecessarily. The door with a clatter of falling ice particles was wrenched open. The last rays of the sun shone into the cabin. Irma bent low, her tight, squat behind inviting an enormous kick, and went down the ladder. James Bond followed her, holding his breath against the searing impact of the Arctic, oxygenless air. There were one or two men standing around dressed like ski guides. They looked at Bond with curiosity, but there was no greeting. Bond went on across the hard-trodden snow in the wake of the woman, the extra man following with his suitcase. It was perhaps 50 yards from where the helicopter had landed to a group of buildings. Bond dawdled, getting preliminary bearings. Ahead was a long, low building, now ablaze with lights. An oblong of yellow opened invitingly as the woman went in and held the door for him. The light illuminated a big sign with the red G surmounted by the coronet. It said Gloria Club, 3,605 meters. Privat. Nur für Mitglieder. Below in smaller letters it said Alpenberghaus und Restaurant Piz Gloria. Bond walked into the inviting yellow oblong. The door, released by the woman, closed with a pneumatic hiss. Inside it was deliciously warm, almost hot. The woman curtly said to Bond,
"Follow me, please."
She went through a facing door and down a thickly piled red-carpeted passage. On the right were at first the doors of the club rooms, marked Bar, Restaurant, and Toiletten. Then came what were obviously doors of bedrooms. Bond was shown into number 2. It was an extremely comfortable, chintz-decorated room with a bathroom leading off. Bond threw his briefcase on the double bed. The extra man appeared with his suitcase, placed it on the luggage stand without looking at Bond, and withdrew, closing the door behind him. The woman stayed where she was.
"Now, perhaps I should explain some things, convey to you some laws of the club, isn't it?"
That would certainly be helpful. He put a politely interested expression on his face. "Where are we, for instance?"
"In the Alps, in the high Alps,"
said the woman vaguely.
"This Alp, Piz Gloria, is the property of the Count. Together with the Gemeinde, the local authorities, he constructed the Seilbahn. You have seen the cables, yes? This is the first year it is opened. It is very popular and brings in much money. There are some fine ski runs. The Gloria Abfahrt is already famous. There is also a bobsleigh run. You ski, perhaps?"
He said apologetically, "I'm afraid not."
"That is a pity."
But the eyes registered satisfaction.
"These installations bring good income for the Count. That is important. It helps to support the Institute for Physiologische Forschung. It is for scientific research. The Count is a leader in the field of allergies, you understand."
"Oh, really? Can't say I suffer from any myself."
"No? The laboratories are in a separate building. There the Count also lives. In this building where we are lives the patients. He asks that you will not disturb them with too many questions. These treatments are very delicate. You understand?"
"Yes, of course. And when may I see the Count?"
"The Count asks to be excused tonight, but he would much like to receive you at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. That is suitable?" Certainly, certainly. That will give me time to marshal my documents, my books.
She moved to the door and pressed the bell button. She gestured downwards.
You will have noticed that there is no door handle on this side. You will ring when you wish to leave the room. It is on account of the patients. It is difficult to prevent them visiting each other for the sake of gossiping. It is for their good. You understand? Bedtime is at 10 o'clock, but there is a night staff in case you need any service. And the doors are, of course, not locked. You may re-enter your room at any time. We meet for cocktails in the bar at 6. My girls are much looking forward to meeting you.
Until 6 o'clock, then. Bond suddenly wanted to be alone with his thoughts. He gestured towards his suitcase. I must get myself unpacked.
Of course, Sir Hilary. Forgive me for detaining you.
And on this gracious note, Irma Bunt closed the door behind her. Bond stood still in the middle of the room. He had noticed that of the 4 electric light prisms in the ceiling, one was a blank protruding eyeball. Closed-circuit television? Microphones? Probably the whole expanse of ceiling was one. That was the wartime gimmick. He simply must assume that he was under constant supervision. James Bond, his thoughts racing, proceeded to unpack, take a shower, and make himself presentable for my girls. When Bond closed the brass-studded door of the bar behind him, he got a fleeting impression of one of the most beautiful groups of girls he had ever seen, when Irma Bunt waddled out and took him in charge.
Sir Hilary, come please and meet my girls.
He was led from table to table. Names like Ruby, Violet, Pearl, Anne, Elizabeth, Beryl sounded in his ears, but all he saw was a sea of beautiful sunburned faces and a succession of splendid sweatered young bosoms. At last he got to the seat between Irma Bunt and a gorgeous, bosomy blonde with large blue eyes. He sat down, overcome. The barman hovered. Bond pulled himself together. "Whiskey and soda, please," he said. Bond turned to the blonde. "I'm terribly sorry, but I didn't catch your name."
I'm Ruby.
The voice was friendly but refined.
It must be quite an ordeal being the only chap. Amongst all us girls, I mean.
Well, it was rather a surprise, but a very pleasant one. Bond's drink came, and he was glad to find it strong. He took a long but discreet pull at it. "I feel like one of those comic film stars who gets snarled up in a girls' school. You know, sort of St. Trinians." She giggled.
"Oh, but we are not at all like St. Trinians. Those awful girls. How could you ever say such a thing?"
"Just a thought," said Bond airily. "Now then, how about another drink?"
"Oh, thanks awfully."
Bond turned to Fräulein Bunt. "And you, Miss Bunt?"
"Thank you, Sir Hilary. An apple juice, if you please."
He got up and went to the bar, wondering how he was going to plow on through this and other evenings. At 7:30, Bond sat down for dinner on the right of Irma Bunt in the same placing as for drinks, with Ruby on his right. Resignedly, Bond turned to Fräulein Bunt. "Fräulein Bunt, before we met for cocktails, it amused me to look up your surname. In England, the name has almost certainly been corrupted into Bounty, perhaps even into Bronte, because the grandfather of the famous literary family by that name had, in fact, changed his name from the less aristocratic name of Bronte. Can you remember if your ancestors had any connection with England? There is the dukedom of Bronte, you see, which Nelson assumed. It would be interesting to establish a connection." Irma Bunt, hooked, went off into a dreary chronicle of her forebears, including, proudly, distant relationship with a Graf von Bunt. Bond listened politely, prodding her back to the immediate past. She gave the name of her father and mother. Bond filed them away. He now had enough to find out exactly who Irma Bunt was. The head waiter, who had been politely hovering, presented giant menus. There were many spécialités Gloria, poulet Gloria, homard Gloria, tornadoes Gloria, and so on. Bond decided to give the chicken a chance. He said so, and was surprised by the enthusiasm with which Ruby greeted his choice. "Oh, how right you are, Sir Hilary. I adore chicken, too. I absolutely dote on it." And Violet stipulated plenty of potatoes with her tornadoes. "I simply love potatoes," she explained to Bond, her eyes shining. "Don't you?" "Yes, fine," agreed Bond. "When you're taking plenty of exercise, that is." "Oh, they're just darling," enthused Violet. What was this? Was this a day off from rigorous dieting? He felt completely clueless. He turned to Ruby. "You see what I mean about surnames. Fräulein Bunt may even have distant claim to an English title. Now, what's yours, for instance? I'll see what I can make of it." Fräulein Bunt broke in sharply.
"No surnames here, Sir Hilary. It is a rule of the house. It is part of the Count's treatment. He has special theories. One day the world will be startled when he reveals his methods."
"I'm sure," said Bond politely. "Well, now, tell me about your skiing. How are you getting on? Don't do it myself, I'm afraid." It was an adequate ball which kept bouncing on between Ruby and Violet, and Bond kept it in play while their food came and proved delicious. The girls fell silent over their dishes, consuming them with polite but concentrated greed. There was a similar pause in the chatter at the other tables. Bond made conversation about the decor of the room, and this gave him a chance to have a good look at the waiters. There were 12 of them in sight. The whole lot of them looked tough enough, had the quiet smell of the pro, and some of them were ski guides during the day. Well, it was a nice little setup. Bond excused himself after dinner on the grounds of work. He went to his room and laid out his books and papers on the desk. At 10 o'clock he heard the good nights of the girls down the corridor and the click of the door shutting. He undressed, switched off the light, and lay on his back for a while, staring up into the darkness. Then he gave an authentic sigh of exhaustion for the microphones, if any, and turned over on his side and went to sleep again. Later he was awakened by a very soft murmuring that seemed to come from somewhere under the floor. He identified it as a minute whispering that went on and on, but he could not make out the words, so he turned over and went to sleep. The next morning at 10 minutes to 11, Irma Bunt came for him. After an exchange of affabilities, Bond gathered up an armful of books and papers and followed her round the back of the club building, and along a narrow, well-trodden path past a sign that said, "Privat, Eintritt verboten." The central corridor was more or less a duplicate of the one at the club, but here there were doors on both sides, and no pictures. They came to the end of the corridor. Irma Bunt knocked on the facing door. "Herein." James Bond was tremendously excited as he stepped over the threshold. He knew what not to expect. The original Blofeld, last year's model. About 20 stone, tall, pale, bland face with black crew cut, black eyes, thin, ugly mouth, long, pointed hands and feet. But Monsieur le Comte de Bleville, who now rose from the chaise longue on the small private veranda, his hands outstretched in welcome, was surely not even a distant relative of the man on the files. Bond's heart sank. This man was tallish, yes, and all right, his hands and naked feet were long and thin, but there the resemblance ended. The Count had longish, carefully tended, almost dandified hair that was a fine silvery white. His ears, that should have been close to his head, stuck out slightly, and where they should have had heavy lobes, had none. The body that should have weighed 20 stone was not more than 12 stone. The mouth was full and friendly, with a pleasant, upturned, but perhaps rather unwavering smile. Bond unloaded his books onto a conveniently empty table and took the warm, dry hand.
"My dear Sir Hilary, this is indeed a pleasure."
Blofeld's voice had been said to be somber and even. This voice was light and full of animation.
"And now," said the Comte de Bleville, "what have you got to tell me that necessitated this personal visit?"
He turned his fixed smile on Bond. "My dear Count,
There are occasions in the work of the college when research and paperwork are simply not enough. Some physical peculiarities exist in connection with the de Bluevilles. You did not know this? I was not aware of it, no. What is it? I have good news for you, Count. Bond smiled his congratulations. All the de Belleville effigies or portraits that we have been able to trace have been distinctive in one vital respect, in one inherited characteristic. It appears that the family had no lobes to their ears. The Count's hands went up to his ears and felt them. Was he acting? I see, he said slowly. Yes, I see. He reflected. Now that you have seen what you came to see, you regard the title as still in question? What I have seen certainly allows me to recommend that the work should continue, Count. And I would say that our chances of success have greatly multiplied. There are still many gaps, and it is most important for me to satisfy Sable Basilisk, particularly about the stages of your family's migration from Augsburg to Gdynia. It would be of the greatest help if I might question you closely about your parentage in the male line. Even details about your father and grandfather would be of the greatest assistance. And then, of course, it would be of the utmost importance if you could spare a day to accompany me to Augsburg, to see if the handwriting of these Blofeld families in the archives, their Christian names and other family details, awaken any memories or connections in your mind. You think that with patient work, even with the inclusion of a few question marks, where the connecting links are obscure, I would achieve an acte de notoriété that would satisfy the Minister of Justice in Paris? Most certainly, lied Bond, with the authority of the college in support. That would give me much satisfaction, Sir Hilary. I am the Comte de Bleville. I am certain of it in my heart, in my veins. There was a real fervor in the voice. You will be most welcome to remain as my guest, and I shall be constantly at your disposal to help you with your researches. Bond said politely, but with a hint of weariness, of resignation, "All right, Count, and thank you. I will go and make a start straight away." Bond returned to his room and got out a giant sheet of squared paper. He sat down at his table and wrote firmly at the top center of the paper, Guillaume de Bleville, 1207-1243. Now there were 500 years of de Blevilles, with their wives and children, to be copied down from his books and notes. That would fill up an impressive number of pages with impeccable fact. He could certainly spread that chore over 3 days, and in between these idiotic activities he would ferret away at the mystery of what in hell the new Blofeld, the new Spectre, were up to. Bond got as far as 1350, and then the noise from the veranda became too distracting. Anyway, he had done a respectable stint, almost to the bottom of the giant page. He would go out and do a little very discreet exploring. He wanted to get his bearings, or rather confirm them, and this would be a perfectly reasonable activity for a newcomer. He left his door into the passage ajar. He went out and along to the reception lounge, where a man was busy entering the names of the morning visitors in a book. Bond's greeting was politely answered. There was a ski room and workshop to the left of the exit. Bond wandered in. A man was at the workbench, screwing a new binding onto a ski. He looked up and went on with his work while Bond gazed with seeming curiosity at the ranks of skis standing along the wall. Bond wandered over to the workbench and feigned interest in what the man was doing. He saw an untidy pile of thin plastic strip. Bond leaned over the workbench. His left hand slid under his leaning arm, secured one of the strips, and slid it up his sleeve. He made an inane comment, which was not answered, and strolled out of the ski room. As Bond strolled along the path that led to the cable station, he transferred the plastic strip from his sleeve to his trouser pocket, feeling pleased with himself. He had at least provided himself with one tool, the traditional burglar's tool for opening the Yale-type locks that secured the doors. Away from the clubhouse, he walked on the well-trampled snow and stood amongst the skiers at the top of the first plunging chute of the Gloria Run. The red and yellow runs were open, but the black closed, presumably because of avalanche danger. There was a painted metal map of the 3 runs.
Bond had a good look at it, reflecting that it might be wise to commit it to memory. The scene was the same as 1,000 others Bond had witnessed when, as a teenager, he learned his skiing in the old Hanne Schneider School at St. Anton in the Arlberg. He had got pretty good, but the style in those days was rudimentary compared to what he was now witnessing from the occasional expert who zoomed down and away from beside him. Bond wondered how he would fare on this terrific run.
Sir Hilary! Sir Hilary!
Startled out of his thoughts, Bond turned. Fräulein Irma Bunt was standing on the path to the club.
Lunchtime?
"Coming!" Bond called back and strolled up the slope towards her. He came up with her. He said he was sorry he had not noticed the time.
Now,
She gestured to the building.
if you will perhaps go out on the terrace, you will be shown to our table. I will be with you in a moment.
Bond followed the maître d'hôtel to a table up against the railing. Ruby and Violet were already there. He sat down and ordered a medium dry vodka martini on the rocks with lemon peel and edged his feet up against Ruby's. She didn't withdraw hers. She smiled. Violet smiled. They all started talking at once. Fräulein Bunt appeared and took her place.
I am so pleased to hear that you will be staying with us for a whole week, Sir Hilary. You enjoyed your interview with the Count? Is he not an interesting man?
Very interesting. Unfortunately, our talk was too short, and we discussed only my own subject. I was longing to ask him about his research work. I hope he didn't think me very rude. Irma Bunt's face closed perceptibly.
I am sure not. The Count does not often like to discuss his work in these specialized scientific fields. You understand? There is much jealousy, and I am sorry to say, much intellectual thieving. That is why we keep ourselves very much to ourselves in that little eagle's nest up here. We have total privacy. Even the police in the valley are most cooperative in safeguarding us from intruders. They appreciate what the Count is doing.
The study of allergies?
Just so.
The maître d'hôtel was standing by her side. His feet came together with a perceptible click. Menus were handed round, and Bond's drink came. He took a long pull at it and ordered Gloria and a green salad. Chicken again for Ruby. Cold cuts with stacks of potatoes for Violet. Irma Bunt ordered her usual cottage cheese and salad. "Don't you girls eat anything but chicken and potatoes? Is this something to do with your allergies?" Ruby began.
Well, yes, in a way. Somehow I've come to simply love...
Irma Bunt broke in sharply.
Now then, Ruby, no discussion of treatments, you remember? Not even with our good friend Sir Hilary.
She waved a hand towards the crowded tables around them.
A most interesting crowd, do you not find, Sir Hilary? Everybody who is anybody. We have quite taken the international set away from Gstaad and St. Moritz. Is it not sensational for the first season?
Bond felt rather than saw a man approaching their table. He came up to Bond. He was a military-looking man of about Bond's age, and he had a puzzled expression on his face. He bowed slightly to the ladies and said to Bond, "Excuse me, but I saw your name in the visitor's book. It's Hilary Bray, isn't it?" Bond said, "Yes, it is," with heartiness. "Sir Hilary Bray?" The pleasant face was even more puzzled. Bond got to his feet and stood with his back to his table to Irma Bunt. "That's right." He took out his handkerchief and blew his nose to obscure the next question, which might be fatal. "In the Lovett Scouts during the war?" "Ah," said Bond. He looked worried, lowered his voice appropriately. "You're thinking of my first cousin. Died 6 months ago, poor chap. I inherited the title." "Oh, Lord!" The man's puzzlement cleared. Grief took its place. "Sorry to hear that. Great pal of mine in the war. What was it?" Bond felt the sweat running down his arms. "Fell off one of those bloody mountains of his. Broke his neck." "My God, poor chap. But he was always fooling around by the tops himself. I was right to Ginny at once." He held out his hand. "Well, sorry to have butted in. So long, and sorry again." He moved off between the tables. Bond sat down, reached for his drink, and drained it. The woman's eyes were on him. "That was some pal of my first cousin's. My cousin had the same name, Collateral Branch. Died not long ago, poor chap." He frowned sadly. "Didn't know this man from Adam. Nice-looking fellow." Bond looked bravely across the table. Irma's yellow eyes were still inquisitive, holding his.
"But it was a curious coincidence. Were you very alike, you and your cousin?"
"Oh, absolutely," said Bond, gushing. "Spit image, often used to get taken for each other." Bond decided the woman couldn't have heard much of it with all the clatter and chatter from the surrounding tables, but it had been a narrow squeak, a damn narrow squeak. Definitely not good enough. My dear Sable Basilisk, I arrived safely by helicopter, if you please, at this beautiful place called Pete's Gloria, 10,000 feet up somewhere in the Engadine. Most comfortable, with an excellent male staff of several nationalities, and a most efficient secretary to the Count named Fräulein Irma Bunt, who tells me that she comes from Munich. I had a most profitable interview with the Count this morning, as a result of which he wishes me to stay on for a week to complete the first draft of his genealogical tree. He is busily engaged on what sounds like a very public-spirited research work on allergies and their cause. He has 10 English girls here as his patients. He has agreed to see me daily in the hope that together we may be able to bridge the gap between the migration of the de Bleuvilles from France and their subsequent transference as Blofelds from Augsburg to Gdynia. I have suggested to him that we conclude the work with a quick visit to Augsburg for the purposes you and I discussed, but he has not yet given me his decision. Please tell my cousin Jenny Bray that she may be hearing from a friend of her late husband who had apparently served with him in the Lovat Scouts. He came up to me at lunch today and took me for the other Hilary. Quite a coincidence. Now for my most interesting item. The Count has not got lobes to his ears. Isn't that good news? He is also of a most distinguished appearance and bearing, with a fine head of silvery hair and a charming smile. His slim figure also indicates noble extraction. He speaks impeccable English with a gay lip to his voice, and I'm sure that we will get on very well. Now to get down to business. It would be most helpful if you would get in touch with the old printers of the Almanach de Gotha and see if they can help us over our gaps in the lineage. They may have some traces. Cable anything helpful. With the new evidence of the earlobes, I am quite confident that the connection exists. That's all for now. Yours ever, Hilary Bray. Bond read the letter several times. Yes, that would give the officers in charge of Operation Corona plenty to bite on, and he had covered up a bit on the Bray mix-up when the letter, as Bond sure it would be, was steamed open and photostated before dispatch. Bond rang the bell, handed out the letter for dispatch, and got back to his work, which consisted initially of going into the bathroom with a strip of plastic and his scissors in his pocket, and snipping 2-inch-wide strips off the end. These would be enough for the purposes he, and he hoped, Ruby would put them to. Then he went back to his desk and to the next 100 years of the de Bleuvilles. At about 5 o'clock there came a very soft tapping at the door. Bond kept his voice low. "Come in." The door opened and quickly closed to within an inch of the lock. It was Ruby. She put her fingers to her lips and gestured towards the bathroom. Bond, highly intrigued, followed her in and shut the door. Then he turned on the light. She was blushing. She whispered imploringly, "Oh, please forgive me, Sir Hilary, but I did so want to talk to you for a second." "That's fine, Ruby, but why the bathroom?" "All the rooms have microphones in them. I don't know where. We think we've got some sort of television, too." She giggled. "We always undress in the bathroom. It's just a sort of feeling, as if one was being watched the whole time. I suppose it's something to do with the treatment." "Yes, I expect so." "The point is, Sir Hilary, I was so disappointed at not being able to tell you my surname today at lunch. You see, her eyes were wide with excitement, it's Windsor.
There's always been talk in my family that we're distantly connected with the royal family.
I can quite understand that. Bond's voice was thoughtful, judicious. What were your parents' names?
George Albert Windsor and Mary Potts. Does that mean anything?
Well, of course, the Albert's significant. Bond felt a cur. You see, there was the Prince Consort to Queen Victoria. He was Albert.
Oh, Cully!
Ruby's knuckles went up to her mouth. But of course all this needs a lot of working on. Where do you come from in England? Where were you born?
In Lancashire, Morecambe Bay, where the shrimps come from, but a lot of poultry too, you know.
So that's why you love chicken so much.
Oh, no.
She seemed surprised by the remark.
That's just the point. You see, I was allergic to chickens. It was awful, and of course my parents were mad at me, they being poultry farmers in quite a big way. And then one day I saw this advertisement in the paper, in the Poultry Farmers' Gazette. It said that anyone suffering from chicken allergy could apply for a cure in the Swiss Institute doing research work on the thing. So I applied, and my fare was paid down to London, and I met Miss Bunt. She said I was just what the Institute wanted, and I came out here about 2 months ago. It's not bad. Terribly strict, but the Count has absolutely cured my trouble. I simply love chickens now.
Her eyes became suddenly rapt.
I think they're just the most beautiful, wonderful birds in the world.
Well, that's a jolly good show, said Bond, totally mystified. Now, about your name, I'll get to work on it right away, but how can I see you by yourself? The only place is my room or yours.
You mean at night?
The big blue eyes were wide with fright, excitement, maidenly appraisal. Yes, it's the only way. Bond took a bold step towards her and kissed her full on the mouth.
Oh, Sir Hilary! But how would you get out of here? They're terribly strict. Guard goes up and down the passage every so often. Of course, I'm next door to you, at number 3, actually. If only we had some way of getting out.
Bond took one of the inch strips of plastic out of his pocket and showed it to her. I learned a thing or two in the army. You can get out of these sort of doors by slipping this in the door crack in front of the lock and pushing. It slips the latch. Here, take this. I've got another. But hide it away and promise not to tell anyone.
Oh, you are one, but of course I promise.
He gave her another long, and he admitted to himself, extremely splendid kiss, to which she responded with an animalism that slightly salved his conscience. Now then, baby, we've got to get you out of here. His bedroom was dark. The building was in silence. He inched open the door. He gave her behind an extra pat, and she was gone. 6 o'clock came. Bond had a quick shower and smartened himself up and went along to the bar. Only a few of the girls were already there. Violet sat alone at the bar, and Bond joined her. She was drinking a daiquiri. Bond ordered another, and for himself a double bourbon on the rocks. He took a deep pull at it and put the squat glass down. By God, I needed that. I've been working like a slave all day while you've been waltzing about the ski slopes in the sun.
Have I indeed?
A slight Irish brogue came out with the indignation.
2 lectures this morning, and I had to catch up with my reading most of the afternoon, and I'm way behind with it.
What sort of reading?
Oh, sort of agricultural stuff.
The dark eyes watched him carefully.
We're not supposed to talk about our cures, you know.
Oh, well, said Bond cheerfully. Then let's talk about something else. Where do you come from?
Ireland. The south, near Shannon.
Bond had a shot in the dark. All that potato country.
Yes, that's right. I used to hate them. Nothing but potatoes to eat and potato crops to talk about. Now I'm longing to get back. Funny, isn't it?
Your family will be pleased.
You can say that again. I've learned about how to improve the crop. The latest scientific ways, chemicals, and so on.
She put her hand up to her mouth. She glanced swiftly around the room at the bartender. She put on a hostess smile.
I was terribly interested in what you were saying to Miss Bunt. You see,
she lowered her voice and spoke into a raised glass.
I'm an O'Neill. They used to be almost kings of Northern Ireland.
She had seen something over his shoulder. She went on smoothly. "And I simply can't get my shoulders round enough, and when I try to, I simply overbalance." "Afraid I don't know anything about skiing," said Bond loudly. Irma Bunt appeared in the mirror over the bar.
"Ah, Sir Hilary, come, let us go and sit down. I see poor Ruby over there all by herself."
They followed her meekly. More drinks were ordered. The bourbon was beginning to uncoil Bond's tensions. He turned to Fräulein Bunt. "By the way, it crossed my mind that it might be fun to go down in the cable car and pay a visit to the valley. I've never been there. I'd love to see it."
"Alas, my dear Sir Hilary, but that is against the rules of the house. Guests here, and the staff too, have no access to the Seilbahn."
"Oh, but couldn't an exception be made in my case?"
"I think that would be a mistake, Sir Hilary. And surely you will need all the time you have to complete your duties for the Count. I am afraid, with many apologies, that what you ask is out of the question."
She glanced at her watch and clapped her hands.
"And now, girls," she called, "it is time for the supper. Come along, come along."
It was 11 o'clock, and the place was as quiet as the grave. Bond, with due respect for the eye on the ceiling, went through the motions of going to the bathroom and then climbing into bed and switching off his light. He gave it 10 minutes, then got quietly out of bed and pulled on his trousers and shirt. Working by touch, he slipped the end of the inch of plastic into the door crack, found the lock, and pressed gently. The edge of the plastic caught the curve of the lock and slid it back. Bond now only had to push gently, and the door was open. He listened. His ears pricked like an animal's. Then he carefully put his head out. The empty corridor yawned at him. Bond slipped out of the door, closed it softly, took the few steps along to number 3, and gently turned the handle. It was dark inside, but there was a stirring in the bed. There came a whisper from the bed. "Is that you?" "Yes, darling." Bond slid out of his clothes and walked over to the bed and sat down on its edge. Gingerly he lay down in the bed and put his head beside hers on the pillow. He kissed her, at first softly, then with fierceness. Her body stirred, her mouth yielded to his, and when his left hand began its exploration, she put her arms around him. He drew the fingernails of his left hand softly down her flat stomach. The velvety skin fluttered. There was real pleasure in what they did to each other, and in the end they lay quietly in each other's arms. There was silence in the little room. Her breathing became regular. Bond was on the edge of sleep. He let himself slide down the soft, easy slope. Then from deep in the bowels of the building there came the peremptory ringing of a deep-toned, melodious electric bell. The girl stirred. She said sleepily, "Oh, damn." "What is it?"
"Oh, it's only the treatment. Don't pay any attention. It's only for me. Just go to sleep."
Bond kissed her between the shoulder blades, but said nothing. Now the bell had stopped. In its place there started up a droning whine, with an unvarying tick-tock of some kind of metronome. The combination of the two sounds was wonderfully soothing. And now the Count's voice.
"You are going to sleep. You are tired and your limbs feel like lead. Your arms feel as heavy as lead. Your breathing is quite even. Your whole body is becoming tired and heavy as lead. You are slipping down into sleep. Your bed is as soft and downy as a nest. You are as soft and sleepy as a chicken in a nest. A dear little chicken, fluffy and cuddly."
There came the sound of a sweet cooing and clucking, the dozy murmurings of mother hens with their chicks. Then the voice came back.
"The little darlings are going to sleep. They are like you, comfortable and sleepy in their nests. You love them dearly, dearly, dearly. You would like them to grow up beautiful and strong. Soon you will be going back to your darling chickens. Soon you will be able to have all the chickens of England. You will be able to improve the breed of chickens all over England. This will make you very, very happy. But you will keep quiet about it. You will say nothing of your methods. People will try and find out your secret, but you will say nothing, because they might try and take your secret away from you, and then you would not be able to make your darling chickens happy and healthy and strong. You will remember what I say. You will remember what I say.
The murmuring voice was getting farther and farther away. Ruby was deeply asleep. Bond reached out for her wrist and felt the pulse. It was plumb on beat with the metronome. Bond let out a deep sigh. So now he had heard it all. He suddenly wanted to get back to his room and think. He slipped out from under the sheet, got to his clothes, and put them on. He manipulated the lock without trouble. There was no movement, no sound in the passage. He slipped back into number 2 and eased the door shut. Then he went into his bathroom, closed the door, switched on the light, and sat down in the lavatory and put his head in his hands. Deep hypnosis. That was what he had heard. The repetitive message injected into the brain while it was on the twilight edge of consciousness. Now, in Ruby's subconscious, the message would work on all by itself through the night, leaving her, after weeks of repetition, with an inbuilt mechanism of obedience to the voice that would be as deep, as compelling as hunger. Bond, exhausted, got up and turned off the light in the bathroom and quietly got himself into bed. The mind whirred on for a sterile half-hour in the overheated brain, and then mercifully he went to sleep. When at 9 o'clock he awoke and threw open his windows, the sky was overcast with the heavy blank gray that meant snow. Bond shut the windows and rang for his breakfast. When it came, there was a note from Fräulein Bunt on the tray. "The Count will be pleased to receive you at 11 o'clock, I.B." Bond ate his breakfast and got down to his third page of de Bleuvilles. He had quite a chunk of work to show up. They met in the Count's study.
Good morning, Sir Hilary. I hope you slept well. We are going to have snow. The Count waved towards the window. It will be a good day for work. No distractions. The telephone by his side buzzed. Excuse me. The Count picked up the receiver and listened. Ja, machen Sie der Verbindung. He paused. Bond politely studied the papers he had brought along. Здесь de Bleuvilles. Da, хорошо. He put the receiver back. Forgive me, that was one of my research workers. He has been purchasing some materials for the laboratories. The cable railway is closed, but they are making a special trip up for him. And now, my dear Sir Hilary, let us get on with our work. Bond became inquisitorial, authoritative. We have your birth date in Gdynia, May 8th, 1908, yes? Correct. Your parents' names? Ernst Georg Blofeld and Maria Stavro Michaelopoulos. Also born in Gdynia? Yes. Now your grandparents. Ernst Stefan Blofeld and Elizabeth Lobomirskaya. So the Ernst is something of a family Christian name. It would seem so. My great-grandfather, he was also Ernst. That is important. You see, Count, among the Blofelds of Augsburg, there are no less than 2 Ernsts. And that is important? Very. Christian names run through families. We regard them as most significant clues. Now, can you remember any farther back? You have done well. We have covered 3 generations. Only another 50 years to go, and we shall have arrived at Augsburg. No! It was almost a cry of pain. My great-great-grandfather, of him I know nothing. Perhaps, if it is a question of money, people, witnesses could be found. My dear Sir Hilary, you and I are men of the world. We understand each other. Extracts from archives, registry offices, the churches, these things. Do they have to be completely authentic? I don't quite understand what you mean, Count. You are a hard-working man, Sir Hilary. You live modestly. Life could perhaps be made easier for you. There are perhaps material benefits. You desire motor cars, a yacht, a pension. You have only to say the word. Name a figure. You need have absolutely no... When there was the noise of an approaching hubbub down the passage. The door burst open. A man, propelled from behind, lurched into the room and fell, writhing to the floor. Two of the guards came stiffly to attention behind him. They looked first at the Count, and then sideways towards Bond, surprised to see him there. The Count said sharply, "Was ist denn los?" Bond knew the answer, and momentarily he died. Behind the snow and the blood on the face of the man on the floor, Bond recognized the face of a man he knew. It was, unmistakably, Sean Campbell, number 2 from Station Z in Zurich. Station Z had been told nothing about Bond's mission. The leading guard was talking in rapid, faulty German with a Slav accent. "He was found in the open ski compartment at the back of the gondola, much frozen, but he put up a strong resistance. He was no doubt following Captain Boris." The man caught himself up. "I mean your guest from the valley, Herr Graf. He says he is an English tourist from Zurich, that he had no money for the fare. He wanted to pay a visit up here. He was searched. He carried 500 Swiss francs, no identity papers." The man shrugged. "He says his name is Campbell."
He wanted to pay a visit up here. He was searched. He carried 500 Swiss francs, no identity papers. The man shrugged. "He says his name is Campbell." At the sound of his name, the man on the ground stirred. He lifted his head and looked wildly around the room. When his eyes lit on the familiar face of Bond, he said hoarsely, "Thank God, James. Tell them it's me. Tell them I'm from Universal Export in Zurich. You know, for God's sake, James, tell them I'm okay." His head fell forward on the carpet. The Count's head slowly turned towards Bond. "You know this man, Sir Hilary?" Bond shook his head sorrowfully. He knew he was pronouncing the death sentence on Campbell. "Never seen him before in my life. Poor chap. Why not ship him down to a hospital in the valley? He looks in a pretty bad way." "And Universal Export?" The voice was silky. "I seem to have heard that name before." "Well, I haven't," said Bond indifferently. "Never heard of it." The Count turned back to the guards. He said softly, "Zur Befragungszelle." He nodded his dismissal. The 2 guards bent down and hauled Campbell up by his armpits. To the interrogation cell. That could mean only one thing under modern methods: total confession. How many hours had Bond got left? "I have told them to take him to the sick room. He will be well looked after." The Count looked from the papers on his desk to Bond. "I am afraid this unhappy intrusion has interfered with my train of thought, Sir Hilary, so perhaps you will forgive me for this morning." The Count said casually, "I suppose you will not be connected in any way with the British Secret Service, Sir Hilary?" Bond laughed out loud. "Oh, good God, no! Didn't even know we had one. Didn't all that sort of thing go out with the end of the war?" Bond chuckled to himself. The Count said coldly, "Then please forgive my question, Sir Hilary. The intrusion by this man has made me over-suspicious. I value my privacy up here." "I couldn't agree more." Bond was effusive. He got to his feet and gathered up his papers from his desk. "And now I must get on with my own research work." The Count got politely to his feet, and Bond went out of the door and along the passage. Then he walked quickly to his room, closed the door, and went into the bathroom and sat down on his usual throne of reflection and wondered what in God's name to do. How long would Campbell have the strength to cover for Bond, retrieve his recognition of Bond? At most a few hours. But how many hours? That was the vital question. That and how long the storm would last. Bond couldn't possibly get away in this stuff. If it stopped, there might be a chance, a damn slim one, but better than the alternatives, of which, if and when Campbell talked, there was only one: death. Bond surveyed his weapons. There were his Gillette razor and his wristwatch, a heavy Rolex Oyster Perpetual on an expanding metal bracelet. Used properly, these could be turned into most effective knuckle-dusters. Bond got up, took the blade out of his Gillette, and dropped the razor into his trouser pocket. He slipped the shaft between his first and second fingers of his left hand so that the blade carrier rested flat along his knuckles. Now, was there anything, any evidence he should try to take with him? Yes, he must try and get all of the girls' names, and, if possible, addresses. For that he would have to use Ruby. Bond went out of the bathroom and sat down at his desk and got on with a fresh page of de Breville's. At least he must continue to show willing, if only to the recording eye. It was about 12:30 when Bond heard his doorknob being softly turned. Ruby slipped in, and her finger to her lips disappeared into his bathroom. Bond went in after her. Ruby's blue eyes were wide and frightened. "You're in trouble," she whispered urgently. "What have you been doing?" "Nothing," said Bond innocently. "What's up?" "We've all been told that we mustn't talk to you unless Miss Budd is there." Her knuckles went distractedly up to her teeth. "Do you think they know about us?" "Couldn't possibly," said Bond, radiating confidence. "I think I know what it is. This morning the Count told me I was disruptive, interfering with your treatments. He asked me to keep myself more to myself. Honestly, I'm sure that's all it is. Rather a pity, really. I think all you girls are terribly sweet. I'd like to have helped you all." "How do you mean, helped us?" "Well, this business of surnames. I talked to Violet last night. She seemed awfully interested. I'm sure it would have amused all the others to have theirs done." He shrugged. "Anyway, I've decided to get the hell away from here. I can't bear being shepherded and ordered about like this. But I'll tell you what I'll do. If you can give me the names of the girls, as many as you know, I'll do a piece on each of them and post them when you all get back to England. How much longer have you got, by the way?" "We're not told exactly, but the rumor is about another week. There's another batch of girls due about then. How are you going to get away? You know we're practically prisoners up here." Bond was offhand. "Oh, I'll manage somehow. They can't hold me here against my will. But what about the names, Ruby? Don't you think it would give the girls a treat?" "Oh, they love it. Of course I know all of them. Have you got anything to write down on?" Bond tore off some strips of lavatory paper and took out a pencil. "Fire away." She laughed. "Well, you know me and Violet. Then there's Elizabeth McKinnon. She's from Aberdeen. Beryl Morgan from somewhere in Herefordshire. Pearl Tampion, Devonshire, and Denise Robertson." The list went on until Bond had got the whole 10. He said, "What about that girl who left in November?" "Polly Tasker. She was from East Anglia. Sir Hilary, I am going to see you again, aren't I?" Bond held her tight and kissed her. "Of course, Ruby. You can always get me at the College of Arms in Queen Victoria Street." "Oh, yes, I will. And you will be careful. Getting away, I mean. Is there anything I can do to help?" "No, darling. Just don't breathe a word of all this. It's a secret between us, right?" "Of course, darling." She glanced at her watch. "Oh, Lord, I must simply fly. Only 10 minutes to lunchtime." Bond, out of any possible line of vision from the eye in the ceiling, did his trick with the door, and she was gone with a last whispered goodbye. Bond eased the door shut. He let out a deep sigh and went over to the window and peered out through the snow-heaped panes. Bond went into the bathroom again and rubbed soap into his eyes. It stung like hell, but the blue-gray eyes emerged from the treatment realistically bloodshot. Satisfied, Bond rang for the warden and went thoughtfully off to the restaurant. Silence fell as he went through the swing doors, followed by a polite, brittle chatter. Eyes followed him discreetly as he crossed the room, and the replies to his good mornings were muted. Bond snapped his fingers for a waiter and ordered his double vodka dry martini. He turned to Fräulein Bunt and smiled into the suspicious yellow eyes. "Would you be very kind?" Bond gestured at his still watering eyes. "I've got a sort of conjunctivitis. The tremendous glare up here, and all this paperwork. Could you get me a pair of snow goggles? I'll only need to borrow them for a day or two, just till my eyes get used to the light.
Yes, that can be done. I will see if they are put in your room.
Bond's drink came. He swallowed it in 2 gulps and ordered another. When the girls at the other tables began to leave, Bond toyed with his lunch. Fräulein Bunt got to her feet and said,
Come, girls.
Now, except for the waiters clearing up, he was alone in the restaurant. He got up and strolled to the door. Outside, on pegs against the wall, the girls' outdoor coats and skiing gloves hung in an orderly row. The corridor was empty. Bond swept the largest pair of leather gauntlets off the peg and stuffed them inside his sweater. Then he sauntered along to the reception room. It was empty. The door to the ski room was open, and the surly man was at his workbench. Bond went in and wandered round the ski racks. They were mostly the girls' skis. The bindings would be too small for his boots. But by the door stood the guide's skis. Bond made a quick guess at how much the bindings would need adjustment to fit his boots, and went off down the corridor to his room. He would be wise to assume that it was only a matter of hours, and then they would come for him. They wouldn't do it until after lights out. To do it before would cause too much talk among the girls. No, they would fetch him at night, but the next day it would be put about that he had left by the first cable car down to the valley. Bond got up from the desk and opened the window. The snow had stopped, and there was a broken blue in the sky. It would be perfect powder snow on the Gloria Run. Now to make everything ready. There are hundreds of secret inks, but there was only one available to Bond, the oldest one in the world, his own urine. He went into the bathroom with his pen, a clean nib, and his passport. Then he sat down and proceeded to transcribe onto a blank page of his passport the names and approximate locations by county of the girls. The page showed nothing. Held in front of a flame, the writing would come up brown. He slipped the passport into his hip pocket. Next, he took the gloves from under his sweater, tried them on, and found them an adequate but tight fit. Took the top off the lavatory cistern and laid the gloves along the arm of the stopcock. It was going to be fiendishly cold at the start. He would just have to make do with the ski clothes he possessed, the gloves, the goggles that had been placed on his table. Extra covering for his face. He would tie one of his red silk bandanas tight over his face below the goggles and discard it if it interfered with his breathing. There was nothing else he could do or insure against. Bond relaxed his thoughts and went out and back to his desk. He sat down and bent to his paperwork and tried not to listen to the hastening tick of the Rolex on his wrist. Tried to fix in his mind the rough geography of the Gloria Run he had inadequately learned from the metal map. Dinner was as ghastly as lunch. Bond concentrated on getting plenty of whiskey and food under his belt. He made urbane conversation and pretended he didn't notice the chill in the air. Then he excused himself on the grounds of work and strode with dignity out of the room. He went about his work, bent to the squared paper. 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. Bond felt the excitement ball up inside him like cat's fur. He got up and stretched. He went into the bathroom and made appropriate noises, retrieved the gloves, and laid them on the bathroom floor just inside the door. Then, naked, he came back into the room and got into bed and switched off the light. He regularized his breathing and in 10 minutes began to snore softly. He gave it another 10, then slid out of bed and with infinite precaution dressed himself in his ski clothes. He bent to the door, manipulated the lock with the plastic and listened briefly and slipped out. There was light from the reception room to his left. Bond crept along, inched round the door jamb. The guard was there, bent over something that looked like a timesheet. The neck was offered. Bond stiffened the fingers of his left hand into the old commando cutting edge. He took the 2 steps into the room and crashed the hand down in the back of the offered neck. The man's face hit the tabletop with a thud, bounced up and half-turned towards Bond. Bond's right flashed out, and the face of the Rolex disintegrated against the man's jaw. The body slid sluggishly onto the carpet and lay still. Bond went round the desk and bent down. There was no heartbeat. Bond straightened himself. The telephone on the desk buzzed like a trapped wasp. Bond picked up the receiver and spoke through the handkerchief across his mouth. Ja?
Alles in Ordnung?
Ja?
Also hört zu. Wir kommen für den Engländer in 10 Minuten, verstanden?
Ist recht.
Also aufpassen, ja?
Zu Befehl. At the other end, the receiver went down. The sweat was beading on Bond's face. Thank God he had answered. So they were coming for him in 10 minutes. Bond leaped for the ski room. Unlocked. He went in and by the light from the reception room found his skis. Carefully he lifted everything out of its wooden slot and strode to the main door and opened it. He laid the skis and sticks softly down in the snow. Now, minutes would have to be wasted getting the bindings absolutely right. James Bond kicked one boot into the groove of the marker toe-hold and knelt down, feeling for the steel cable that went behind his heel. And now the same job on the other ski. Bond stood up, slipped the gloves over his aching fingers, picked up the lance-like sticks, and pushed himself off along the faint ridge. It felt all right. The skis hissed smoothly through the powder snow. He punted himself forward as fast as he could with his sticks. Their fastest guide would certainly catch him easily unless he got a good start. Every minute, every second was a bonus. There was the starting point of the Gloria run. Bond didn't pause. He went straight for it and over the edge. The first vertical drop had a spine-chilling bliss to it. Bond got down into a crouch, his hands forward of his boots, and just let himself go. Danger was momentarily forgotten in the joy of speed, technique, and mastery of the snow. He pointed his skis down and felt real rapture as, like a black bullet on the giant slope, he zoomed down the 45-degree drop. Bond took it at speed, felt his skis leave the ground, and jabbed into the snow with his left stick as an extra lever, and threw his skis and his right shoulder and hips round to the left. He landed in a spray of snow at a dead halt. He was now on the shoulder of the mountain. High overhead, the silver strands of the cable railway plunged downwards. Bond remembered that there now followed a series of great zigs and zags, more or less beneath the cables. He would do some S-turns down the next slope and then make for it. Then there came a deep boom from high up the mountain. There was a sharp crack and a blazing magnesium flare on a parachute, wiping out the black shadows in the hollows, turning everything into a hideous daylight. Another and another sprayed out across the sky, and at the same time the cables high above Bond's head began to sing. They were sending a cable car down after him. Bond cut his S's narrower, snaking down faster. The magnesium flares were swaying lower, almost directly over him. Something landed with a tremendous crack amidst a fountain of snow to his right, another to his left. They had a grenade thrower up front in the cable car. A bracket. Would the next one be dead on? Almost before the thought flashed through his mind, there came a tremendous explosion just ahead of him, and he was hurled forward and sideways in a wheel of sticks and skis. Bond got to his feet, gasping and spitting snow. One of his bindings had opened. His trembling fingers found the forward latch and banged it tight again. He must get away from the line of fire, from the blasted railway. He took a vague bearing across the slope and flung himself down it. It was a tricky, undulating ground, but he got across without a fall. But then, high up above him, from somewhere near the shoulder, came more rapid fire from 2 points, and the snow kicked up daintily around him. So the guides had finally got after him. A bullet whanged into one of his skis and sang off down the mountain. Bond took a last gulp of breath and got going again, away from the cable railway towards the next flag. It looked as if the run was going to take him dangerously close to the skirts of the peak. Something was nagging at his mind, a tiny memory. It was something unpleasant. Yes, by God, the last flag. It had been black. He was on the black run, the one closed because of avalanche danger. He'd just have to chance it. And what a time to chance it, just after a heavy fall of new snow, and with all these detonations to loosen up the stuff. Well, the hell with it. Bond zoomed on across the great unmarked slope, got to the next flag, spotted the next, away down the mountainside towards the tree line. And then the bastards chose to fire off 3 more flares, followed by a stream of miscellaneous rockets that burst prettily among the stars. This was for the sake of watchers in the valley who might be inquisitive about the mysterious explosions high up the mountain. They were having a party up there, celebrating something, and then Bond remembered it was Christmas Eve. White Christmas. Well, he'd certainly got himself that. But then from high up above him he heard that most dreaded of all sounds in the high Alps, that rending, booming crack. Avalanche. The ground shook violently under Bond's skis, and the swelling rumble came down to him like the noise of express trains roaring through 100 tunnels. Bond pointed his skis down towards the tree line and shot into white space. The trees were rushing towards him. Was there a break in the bloody black line of them? Yes, but more to the left. Bond veered, dropping his speed, gratefully, but with his ears strained to gauge the range of the thunder behind and above him. The shudder in the ground had greatly increased, and a lot of the stuff would also find the hole through the trees, funnel itself in and pursue him even down there. Bond flung himself straight down the wide, white glade between the trees. The crashing of the trees was coming closer. The first froth of the white tide couldn't be far behind his heels. The opening at the end of the glade, the shimmer of the last, easily sloping fields before the finish was showing up. The crackling roar behind him was getting louder. Bond reached the end of the glade. It was his last hope, to get below the wide belt of trees and pray that the avalanche wouldn't mow down the lot of them. Then Bond's right ski snarled a root or a sapling, and he felt himself flying through space. He landed with a crash and lay gasping, all the wind knocked out of him. A tremendous buffet of wind hit him, and a small snowstorm covered him. The ground shook wildly, and a deep crashing roar filled his ears, and then it had passed him and given way to a slow, heavy rumble. Bond brushed the snow out of his eyes and got unsteadily to his feet, both skis loose, his goggles gone. Only a cricket pitch away, a great torrent of snow, perhaps 20 feet high, was majestically pouring out of the wood and down into the meadows. Its much higher, tumbling snout, tossing huge crags of broken snow about it, was already 100 yards ahead and still going fast. But where Bond stood, it was now silent and peaceful, except for the machine-gun fire crackling of the trees as they went down in the wood that had finally protected him. The crackling was getting nearer. No time to hang about. He got to his feet and started on the last mile of finishing Schuss across the meadows to the right, away from the still hurtling river of snow. Blast! There was a fence across the bottom of the meadows. He would have to take the normal outlet for the runs beside the cable station. It looked all right. There was no sign of the gondola, but he could now hear the song of the cables. There was a large black saloon car in the forecourt to the cable station, and lights on in the station, but otherwise no sign of life. Well, it was his only way to get off the run and onto the road that was his objective. Bond shussed easily downwards, resting his limbs, getting his breath back. The sharp crack of a heavy-caliber pistol in the foot as the bullet hit the snow beside him pulled him together. He glanced quickly up to the right, where the shot had come from. The gun blazed again. A man on skis was coming fast after him. He would have taken the red run. Bond studied the finishing point that was now coming at him fast. There was a wide break in the fence to let the skiers through, a large parking place in front of the cable station. On the other side of the main railway line, the embankment dropped into the road from Pontresina to Samaden, and the junction for Samoritz, perhaps 2 miles down the valley. Another shot kicked up the snow in front of him. That was 6 that had gone. With any luck, the man's pistol was empty, but that wouldn't help much. There was no stuffing left in Bond for a fight. Now a great blaze of light showed coming up the railway line, and before it was hidden by the cable station, Bond identified an express and could just hear the thudding of its electro-diesels. My God, it would just about be passing the cable station as he wanted to get across the track. Could he make it before the train got there? Bond dug in with his sticks to get on extra speed. Hell, a man had got out of the black car and was crouching, aiming at him. Bond jinked and jinked again as fire bloomed from the man's hand. But now Bond was on top of him. He thrust hard with the rapier point of a ski stick and felt it go through clothing. The man gave a scream and went down. The guide, now only yards behind, yelled something. The great yellow eye of the diesel glared down the tracks, and Bond caught a sideways glimpse of a huge red snow fan below the headlight that was fountaining the new snow to right and left of the engine in two white wings. Now! He flashed across the parking place, heading straight at the mound of the embankment, and as he hit, dug both his sticks in to get his skis off the ground and hurled himself forward into the air. There was a brief glimpse of steel rails below, a tremendous thudding in his ears, and a ferocious blast only yards away from the train's siren. Then he crashed onto the icy road, tried to stop, failed, and fetched up in an almighty skid against the hard snow wall on the other side. As he did so, there came a terrible scream from behind him, a loud splintering of wood and the screech of the train's brakes being applied. At the same time, the spray from the snow fan that had now reached Bond turned pink. Bond wiped some of it off his face and looked at it. His stomach turned. God, the man had been caught by the murderous blades of the snow fan. Bond pulled himself together and punted off down the black ice of the road. Bond edged his skis a little against the camber of the road and kept going. Bond somehow stayed upright down the 2 miles of gentle slope to Samaden. Only a few more 100 yards to the lights of the darling, straggling little paradise of people and shelter. The slender campanile of the village church was floodlit, and there was a great warm lake of light on the left of the twinkling group of houses. The strains of a waltz came over the still, frozen air. The music lilted down towards him from the great pool of light over a skating rink. Bond pulled himself a little more upright. There was a big notice in 3 languages across the entrance. Grand Christmas Eve Ball, fancy dress, entrance 2 francs. Bring all your friends, hooray! Bond dug in his sticks and bent down to unlatch his skis. He lugged them down the trodden path towards the entrance, gay with fairy lights, shoved the skis and the sticks under a big saloon car, and staggered on. The man at the ticket table said, 2 Franken, 2 francs, 2 francs. Bond held on to the table, put down the coins, and got his ticket. The man's eyes focused. The fancy dress, the travesti, it is obligatoire. He reached into a box by his side and threw a black and white domino mask on the table. 1 franc. He gave a lopsided smile. Now you are the gangster, the spy, yes? Yeah, that's right. Bond paid and put on the mask. He reluctantly let go of the table and wove through the entrance. There were raised tiers of wooden benches round the big square rink. Thank God for a chance to sit down. There was an empty seat on the aisle in the bottom row at rink level. Bond stumbled down the wooden steps and fell into it. Through the loudspeakers, the violins sobbed into the skater's waltz. Above them, the voice of the MC called, Last dance, ladies and gentlemen, then all out on the rink and join hands for the grand finale. Only 10 minutes to go to midnight. Last dance, ladies and gentlemen, last dance. There was a rattle of applause. People laughed excitedly. He fell asleep. Hours later, he felt his shoulder being shaken. On to the rink, sir, please. All onto the rink for the grand finale. Only a minute to go. A man in purple and gold uniform was standing beside him, looking down impatiently. He struggled to his feet, made the few steps to the rink, somehow stood upright. He looked to left and right, saw a gap in the human chain round the rink, and slid gingerly towards it. A hand was held out to him, and he grasped it thankfully. Then there came a diversion. From right across the rink, a girl in a short black skating skirt, topped by a shocking pink fur-lined parka, sped like an arrow across the ice and came to a crash stop in front of Bond. Bond felt the ice particles hit his legs. He looked up. It was a face he recognized. Those brilliant blue eyes, the look of authority now subdued beneath golden sunburn, and a brilliant smile of excitement. Who in hell? The girl slipped in beside him, seized his right hand in her left, joined up on her right. James. It was a thrilling whisper. Oh, James, it's me, Tracy. What's the matter with you? Tracy, said Bond dully. Tracy, hold on to me. I'm in bad shape. Tell you later. Then Old Lang Syne began, and everyone swung linked hands in unison to the music. Bond had no idea how he managed to stay upright, but at last it was over, and everyone cheered and broke up into pairs and groups. Tracy got her arm under his. Bond pulled himself together. He said hoarsely, "Mix with the crowd, Tracy. Got to get away from here. People after me." A sudden hope came to him. "Got your car?" "Yes, darling. Everything be all right. Just hang on to me. Are people waiting for you outside?" "Could be. Watch out for a big black Mercedes. They may be shooting. Where's the car?" "Down the road to the right." He held her hand and followed her through the crowd that was now streaming towards the exit. Bond peered through the slits in his mask. Yes, by God. 2 of the thugs were standing beside the ticket man, watching the throng with deadly concentration. On the far side of the road stood the black Mercedes, petrol vapor curling up from its exhaust. Bond put his arm around Tracy's neck and whispered, "Kiss me all the way past the ticket table. They're there, but I think we can make it." She flung an arm over his shoulder and drew him to her. "How did you know that's what I've been waiting for?" Her lips crushed down sideways on his, and in a tide of laughing, singing people, they were through and on the street. They turned, still linked, down the road. Yes, there was the darling little white car. And then the horn on the Mercedes began sounding urgently. Bond's gait, or perhaps his old-fashioned ski trousers, had given him away to the man in the car. "Quick, darling," said Bond urgently. The girl threw herself behind the wheel, pressed the starter, and the car was moving as Bond scrambled in through the opposite door. Bond looked back. Through the rear window he could see the 2 men running to the Mercedes. Thank God it was pointing up the hill towards Samoritz. And then Tracy did a controlled skid round, and they were on the main road that Bond had staggered down half an hour before. It would be 5 minutes at least before the Mercedes would turn and get after them. The girl was going like hell. Bond said, "You're an angel, Tracy, but take it easy. We don't want to end up in the ditch." The girl glanced sideways at him and laughed with pleasure. "It sounds as if you are feeling better." He said, "I'll tell you if I'm better when we get to Zurich." He wound down the window and threw the domino mask out. The big sign for the main road down into the valley came up. He said, "Left here, Tracy. Philizur and then Coire." She took the turning, in Bond's estimation, dangerously fast. Bond said, "Tell me how you happened to be at Samarden. It saved my life." "Papa rang me up one day from Marseille to find out how I was. He asked if I had seen you and seemed very annoyed when he had heard I hadn't. He practically ordered me to go and find you." She glanced at him. "He said he had found out the address of a certain man you were looking for. He said he was sure that by now you would have found out that address too. He said that knowing you, I would find you somewhere close to this address. It was the Pete's Gloria Club. So I came to Samarden the day before yesterday. The Seilbahn wasn't running yesterday, so I was going to come up today to look for you. It was all as simple as that. What have you been up to? Don't try to fool me. I know you're in the Secret Service. Papa told me so." Bond said curtly, "Well, Papa's talking through his hat." She laughed knowingly. Bond told her the story. She thought it over for a minute. Then she said calmly, "Would they kill us if they caught us?" "I'm afraid so. I haven't got any weapons. I'm sorry, Tracy, but I'm afraid you wouldn't have much chance either." "Well, then, I've got pretty bad news for you. The Mercedes is gaining on us, and I've only got a couple of gallons left in the tank. We'll have to stop in Philizur. You'll have to think up something clever." There was a ravine and an S-turn over a bridge. They were coming out of the first curve over the bridge. There was half a mile between the 2 cars, but the range across the ravine was perhaps only 300 yards. Then they were into the second half of the S-bend and out of sight of their pursuers. Now came a stretch of reconstruction work where there had been a landslide. The broken road hugged the mountainside on the right. On the left was rickety fencing, and then a precipice falling hundreds of feet down into a gorge with an ice-flowed river. In the middle of the bad stretch, a huge red wooden arrow pointed right to a narrow track across a temporary bridge. Bond suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Tracy pulled up, her front wheels on the bridge. Bond tore open the door. "Get on! Wait for me round the next corner. It's the only chance." Bond ran back the few yards to the big red arrow. Bond swung it round so that it pointed to the left, towards the flimsy fence that closed off the yards of old road leading to the collapsed bridge. Bond tore at the fence, pulling the stakes out, flattening it. Glare showed round the corner behind him. He leaped across the temporary road into the shadow of the mountain, flattened himself against it, waited, holding his breath. The Mercedes made straight for the black opening to which the arrow now pointed. Bond caught a glimpse of white, strained faces, and then the desperate scream of brakes as the driver saw the abyss in front of him. Now the car was flying upside down through the air. It hit, and a fountain of sparks flashed from a rock ledge, and then all was peaceful, moonlit silence. Bond straightened things out again, put up the remains of the fence, lifted the arrow and put it back, facing to the right. Then he wiped his sweating hands down the side of his trousers and walked unsteadily down the road and round the next corner. The little white car was there, pulled in to the side with its lights out. Bond got in and slumped into his seat. Tracy said nothing, but got the car going. She reached out a hand and held his tightly. "You've had enough for one day. Go to sleep. I'll get you to Zurich. Please do what I say." Bond said nothing. He pressed her hand weakly, leaned his head against the door jamb, and was instantly asleep. In the gray dawn, Zurich airport was depressing and almost deserted, but blessedly there was a Swissair Caravelle waiting to take off for London. Bond parked Tracy in the restaurant and went and bought himself a ticket. He ordered plenty of scrambled eggs and coffee. "That car of yours is going to be bad news. There'll be people who've seen you drive away with the Mercedes on your tail. You'd better finish your breakfast and get the hell on over the frontier. Which is the nearest?"
"Schaffhausen or Constance, I suppose, but," she pleaded. "James, do I have to leave you now?"
Bond suddenly thought, "Hell, I'll never find another girl like this one. She's got everything I've ever looked for in a woman. We're two of a pair, really. Why not make it for always? Tracy, I love you. Will you marry me?" She turned very pale. She looked at him wonderingly. Her lips trembled.
"You mean that?"
"Yes, I mean it. With all my heart."
"Yes, of course I'll marry you. And I won't be silly about it. I won't make a scene. Just kiss me once and I'll be going."
She looked seriously at him, at every detail of his face. Then she leaned forward and they kissed. She got up briskly.
"I'll drive to Munich, to the Vier Jahreszeiten. It's my favorite hotel in the world. I'll wait for you there. They know me. They'll take me in without any luggage. You telephone me? When can we get married? I must tell Papa. He'll be terribly excited."
"Let's get married in Munich, at the consulate. I've got a kind of diplomatic immunity. I can get the papers through quickly. I'll call you up tonight and tomorrow. I'll get to you just as soon as I can. I've got to finish this business first."
"All right, then."
She stood up and, without looking back, walked straight out of the restaurant and down the stairs toward the exit. The voice of the PA said, "Attention, please. Passengers on Swissair, flight number 110 for London. Please assemble at gate number 2. Bond stubbed out his cigarette and walked to the door, leaving the fragments of his old life torn up amidst the debris of an airport breakfast. When the Caravelle hit the runway in London, Bond suddenly realized that he had no luggage, that he could go straight to passport control and then out and back to his flat. Would there be a car from the pool for him? There was, with Miss Mary Goodnight sitting beside the driver. "My God, Mary, this is a hell of a way to spend your Christmas. This is far beyond the line of duty. Why this VIP treatment?"
You're to check with HQ first, and then go down to quarterdeck for a conference. Everything top priority. I didn't want to miss the fun, and when the duty officer got onto me about an hour ago and told me there was a major flap, I asked him to tell a car to pick me up on the way to the airport."
Bond said seriously, "Well, you're a damn good girl. As a matter of fact, it's going to be the hell of a rush getting down the bare bones of a report." The car drew up outside Bond's flat. Bond handed Mary his passport.
Now, give this to the driver and ask him to get the hell over and give it to the duty officer personally. Tell the DO to tell the lab that the ink used is, homemade. All it needs is exposure to heat. They'll understand. Got that? Good girl. He went up his steps and rang 2 shorts and along the bell. M would have preferred to live by the sea, anywhere where he could see the stuff whenever he wanted to, and could listen to it at night. As it was, and since he had to be within easy call of London, he had chosen the next best thing to water trees, and had found a small Regency manor house on the edge of Windsor Forest. Hammond, M's chief petty officer on the HMS Repulse, who had followed M into retirement, greeted Bond as an old friend, and he was shown into M's study.
"Afternoon, James. Happy Christmas and all that. Take a chair."
M himself went behind his desk and sat down. Bond automatically took his traditional place across the desk from his chief.
"Now then,"
He settled back.
"what the devil have you been up to?"
The gray eyes regarded Bond keenly. "Perhaps you'd like to have a look at my report first. I'm afraid it's only a draft. There wasn't much time. But I can fill in anything that isn't clear." M reached across for the papers, adjusted his spectacles, and began reading. M threw the papers down on his desk. He put his hands flat on the desk and said, and there was an unusual kindness in his voice,
"Well, you were pretty lucky to get out of that one, James. Didn't know you could ski."
"I only just managed to stay upright, sir. Wouldn't like to try it again."
"Oh, and I see you say you can't come to any conclusions about what Blofeld is up to."
"That's right, sir. Haven't got a clue."
"Well, nor have I. I just don't understand any part of it, but you're obviously right that it's Spectre all over again. We were doubtful about your identification of Blofeld. You're absolutely sure of him, are you?"
"I think it must be him, sir. I was really getting the authentic smell of him yesterday."
"You were lucky to run into this girl. Who is she? Some old flame of yours?"
M's mouth turned down at the corners. "More or less, sir. She came into my report on the first news we got that Blofeld was in Switzerland. Daughter of this man, Draco, head of the Union Corps. Her mother was an English governess."
"Interesting breeding."
It was 3 o'clock. A car's wheels scrunched on the gravel outside. M said,
"That'll be 501. You'll have come across him, head of the scientific research section, and a man called Franklin from the Ministry of Agriculture. We'll let them have a look at your report and see what they make of it, all right?"
"Yes, sir." The door opened and the 2 men came in. Number 501 of the Secret Service, whose name Bond remembered was Leathers, was a big-boned, rangy man with the stoop and thick spectacles of the stage scientist. Franklin was small and brisk and keen-looking, with darting, amused eyes. When the appropriate greetings and apologies for disturbed Christmases had been made, and they were in their chairs, Franklin said, "Now then, perhaps you could tell me what this is all about. I know practically nothing about it except that the man on top of Alp is making efforts to improve our agriculture and livestock. Very decent of him."
"I think the best course would be for you and Mr. Leathers to read the report of my representative here."
A long silence fell in the room. M turned to 501 when he was finished reading the report.
"Well?"
"I don't get the object of the exercise, sir. It seems perfectly above board. Praiseworthy, in fact, if we did know what we do know about Blofeld."
501 shrugged. M turned to Franklin.
"Well, now, Mr. Franklin, what do you think of all this?"
Franklin reached down for his briefcase and took out some papers. From among them he extracted a black-and-white outline map of Britain and Eire, and smoothed it down across the desk. He said,
"This is a map showing the total agricultural and livestock resources of Britain and Eire.
leaving out grassland and timber. Now, at my first sight of the report, I admit I was completely confused. As Mr. Leather said, these experiments seem perfectly harmless, but, Franklin smiled, I have one piece of evidence which may be decisive. Franklin took a red pencil out of his breast pocket and leaned over the map. Glancing from time to time at the list, he made a series of red circles at seemingly unrelated points across Britain and Era. But Bond noticed that they covered the areas where the forests of symbols were at their densest. As he made the circles, he commented, Aberdeen, Aberdeen Angus, Devon, Red Pole, Lancashire, Poultry, Kent, Fruit, Sherman, Potatoes, until 10 red circles stood out on the map. Finally, he poised his pencil over East Anglia and made a big cross. He looked up and said, Turkeys, and threw his pencil down. In the silence that followed, M said rather testily, Well, Mr. Franklin, what have you in mind? Franklin bent and dug into his briefcase. He came up with several papers. He selected one, a newspaper cutting. He said, This is from the Daily Telegraph of early December. I won't read it all. These are the headlines. Concern over turkeys, flocks ravaged by fowl pest. And it goes on. Supplies for turkey to the Christmas market may be hit by recent fowl pest outbreaks, which have resulted in large numbers of birds being slaughtered. And further down, figures available show that 218,000 birds have been slaughtered last year. Total supplies for the Christmas market were estimated at between 3,700,000 and 4 million birds. So what should depend on only the extent of further fall pest outbreaks. Franklin put the cutting down. That news was only the tip of the iceberg. Within the past 4 weeks or so, we have slaughtered 3 million turkeys, and that's only the beginning of it. Fowl pest is running wild in East Anglia, and there are signs of it in Suffolk and Hampshire, with a lot of turkey raising going on. M said sourly, I see you've had quite a problem on your hands, but to get back to our case, where do we go from turkeys? Franklin said, We have one clue. All the birds that died first were exhibited at the National Poultry Show at Olympia early this month. Olympia had them cleared and cleaned out for the next exhibition before we had reached that conclusion. We could find no trace in the premises of the virus. Fowl pest is a virus, by the way, highly infectious, with a mortality of 100%. We happen to be the most highly agriculturalized country in the world. So, in theory, we would be an ideal target for biological warfare. He slowly brought his hands down on the table for emphasis. I don't think it would be too much to say, gentlemen, that if such an attack could be launched, and it can only be countered by slaughtering the poultry and animals and burning the crops, we would be a bankrupt country within a matter of months. We would literally be down on our knees begging for bread. Am I right in thinking that you conclude that this warfare is mounting a biological warfare against this country? Yes, Franklin was definite. I am. This is the end of slide 1. This program is continued on slide 2 of this cassette.
Am I right in thinking that you conclude that this man Blofeld is mounting a biological warfare against this country?
Yes, Franklin was definite.
I am. And how do you work that out?
Franklin reached over and pointed to the red cross he had made over East Anglia.
That was my first clue. The girl, Polly Tasker, who left this Gloria place over a month ago, came from somewhere around here, where you'll see from the symbols that there's the greatest concentration of turkey farmers. She suffered from an allergy against turkeys. She came back inspired to improve the breed. Within a week of her return, we have the biggest outbreak of foul pest affecting turkeys in the history of England. Now,
Franklin turned to Bond.
how would it be if before this Polly girl left, she was given an aerosol spray of the right stuff and told that this was some kind of turkey elixir, a tonic to make them grow fatter and healthier, and suppose she was told to go to Olympia for the show and just casually spray this aerosol here and there among the prize birds? She'd been told to keep it a secret. It'd be quite easy to do. All right, if you go along with me so far, she was probably told to do the job on one of the last 2 days of the show, so that the effects wouldn't be seen too soon. Then, at the end of the show, all the prize birds are dispersed back to their owners all over England, and that's that. Then, he paused, mark you, that was that. 3 million birds dead, and still dying all over the place, and a great chunk of foreign currency coughed up by the Treasury to replace them.
Leathers, his face red with excitement, butted in.
And the other girls, all from the danger spots, all from the areas of greatest concentration, local shows taking place all the time, cattle, poultry, even potatoes, and it's so damn simple. I really must hand it to the man.
M turned to Bond. He barked.
What do you think?
I'm afraid it fits, sir. The whole way along the line. We know the man. It fits him, too, right up his street. M got to his feet. He said,
All right, gentlemen. Mr. Franklin, will you tell your minister what you heard? It'll be up to him to tell PM and the cabinet as he thinks fit. I'll get on with the preventative measures, first of all through Sir Roland Valence of the CID. We must pick up this Polly woman and get the others as they come into the country. Then we'll have to think what to do with Mr. Blofeld.
He turned to Bond.
Stay behind, would you?
Goodbyes was said, and M came back to his desk. He said moodily,
This is a dirty business, James, but I'm afraid it makes sense. Better to do something about it, I suppose.
M looked straight at Bond.
Any ideas?
Bond took a deep pull at his whiskey and put the glass carefully down. He began talking, urgently, persuasively. As he expounded his plan, M's face sank deeper and deeper in gloom. And when Bond concluded with, "And that's the only way I can see, sir. All I need is 2 weeks' leave of absence. I could put in a letter of resignation if it would help." M turned in his chair and gazed deep into the dying flames of the log fire. M turned back. The gray eyes were fierce.
All right. 007. Go ahead. I can't go to the PM about it. He'd refuse. But for God's sake, bring it off, right?
I understand, sir. And I can have the 2 weeks' leave?
Yes.
At midnight, Bond called Tracy in Munich and heard her darling, excited voice.
Tomorrow I'm going up to the Zugspitze and sit in the sun so as to look pretty for you.
Now listen, Tracy. I'm posting my birth certificate to you tomorrow with a covering letter to the British consul saying I want to get married to you as soon as possible. It'll take a few days, I'm afraid. I've got 3 days or so of work to do, and I'm going down to see your father tomorrow and ask for your hand in marriage. Now, you ought to stay where you are. Bond called the Marseille number of the Appareil Electrique Draco, and Marc-Ange's voice, almost as excited as Tracy's, was on the line. Bond said, "Now, listen, Marc-Ange, I want you to give me a wedding present."
Anything, my dear James. What is it you would like?
I'll tell you tomorrow evening. I'm booked on the afternoon Air France to Marseille. Will you have someone meet me? And it's business, I'm afraid. So could you have your other directors present for a little meeting? We shall need all our brains. It is about our sales organization in Switzerland. Something drastic needs to be done about it.
Aha!
There was full understanding in the voice.
Yes, it is indeed a bad spot on our sales map. I will certainly have my colleagues available. I assure you, my dear James, that anything that can be done will be done. Of course, you will be met. Good night, my dear fellow.
There was a Marseille taxi driver to meet Bond. He was apparently known and enjoyed by everyone at the airport, and Bond was whisked through the formalities. Minutes later, they pulled up beside an apartment house with a sign that announced in furious neon, Appareil Electrique Draco. The well-lit interior of the store contained what you would expect. Television sets, radios, electric irons, fans, and so forth. A porter took Bond's suitcase and led the way down a corridor, close carpeted and with wall brackets in good taste. He opened a door. Marc-Ange, his creased walnut face split by his great golden-toothed smile, got up from his desk, trotted across the broad room, threw his arms around Bond's neck, and kissed him squarely on both cheeks.
Sit down and tell me what I can do for you.
Bond told him the whole story. Marc-Ange's face remained impassive throughout. Only his quick animal eyes flickered continually across Bond's face. When Bond had finished, Marc-Ange sat back.
Yes, it is indeed a dirty business. It must be finished with, destroyed, and the man too. But this Blofeld, he is too bad, too disgusting. You have come to ask the Union to make war on him, to destroy him. You need not answer. I know it is so. This is something that cannot be done officially. You will get nowhere with the Swiss. You wish me and my men to do the job. He smiled suddenly. That is the wedding present you talked of, yes?
That's right, Marc-Ange. But I'll do my bit. I'll be there, too. I want this man for myself. I don't want someone else to shoot my fox.
Okay. We bring in the others, yes? They will not need to know the reason why. My orders are my orders. I think it can be done, and swiftly done. But it must also be well done, cleanly done. There must be no untidiness about this thing.
Marc-Ange picked up his telephone and spoke into it. A minute later, the door opened and 2 men came in and, with hardly a glance at Bond, took the other 2 chairs. Marc-Ange nodded at the one next to Bond, a great ox of a man with the splayed ears and broken nose of a boxer or wrestler.
This is Tchétché, le persuadeur, and this is Toussaint, otherwise known as le Pouf. He is our expert with le plastique. We shall need plenty of plastique.
"We shall indeed," said Bond, with pretty quick time pencils. "And this," Marcange gestured at Bond, "is my friend. My absolute friend. He is simply le commandant. And now to business." He had been speaking in French, but now he broke into rapid Corsican, which, apart from a few Italian and French roots, was incomprehensible to Bond. At one period he drew a large-scale map of Switzerland out of a drawer of his desk, spread it out, searched with his finger, and pointed to a spot in the center of the Engadine. The two men craned forward, examined the map carefully, and then sat back. Chiche said something which contained the word Strasbourg, and Marcange nodded enthusiastically. He turned to Bond and handed him a large sheet of paper and pencil. "Be a good chap and get to work on this, would you? A map of the Gloria buildings with approximate sizes and distances from each other. Later we will do a complete maquette in plasticine, so that there is no confusion. Every man will have his job to do." He smiled. "Like the commandos in the war, yes?" Bond bent to his task while the others talked. The telephone rang. Marcange picked it up. He jotted down a few words and rang off. He turned to Bond, his eyes momentarily suspicious. "It is a telegram for me from London, signed Universal. It says, 'The birds have assembled in the town and all fly tomorrow.' What is this, my friend?" "It means that the girls are in Zurich and are flying to England tomorrow. It is very good news. It was important to have them out of the way." "Ah, good, very good indeed. That is fine news. And you were quite right not to have the telegram addressed to you. You are not supposed to be here, or know me at all. It is better so." After that, the meeting soon broke up. Marcange examined Bond's handiwork and passed it over to Toussaint. The man glanced at the sketch and folded it as if it were a valuable share certificate. With short bows in Bond's direction, the two men left the room. Marcange sat back with a sigh of satisfaction. "It goes well," he said. "The whole team will receive good danger money. I am taking 5 of the best. With you and me, that is 7. How many did you say there are on the mountain?" "About 8. And the big one." "Ah, yes, the big one," said Marcange reflectively. "That is one that must not get away." He got up. "And now, my friend, I have ordered dinner, a good dinner to be served us up here. And then we will go to bed stinking of garlic, and perhaps just a little bit drunk, yes?" From his heart, Bond said, "I can't think of anything better." The next day, after lunch, Bond made his way by plane and train to the Hotel Maison Rouge at Strasbourg. The morning had been an endless series of conferences round the model of Piet's Gloria and its buildings that had been put up in the night. Bond was vastly impressed by the authority and incisiveness of Marcange as he dealt with each problem, from the obtaining of a helicopter down to the pensions that would be paid to the families of the dead. Marcange hadn't liked the helicopter business. He had explained to Bond, "You see, my friend, there is only one source for this machine, the OAS, the French secret army of the right wing. It depends that they are under an obligation to me, and everyone, and that is the way I would have it. I happen to know that the OAS has a military helicopter stolen from the French army. Early this morning I have spoken on my radio to the right man, and I have the machine on loan for 24 hours with the best pilot in their secret air force. He's already on his way to the place to make his preparations, fuel, and so on. But it is unfortunate. Before, these people were in my debt. Now I am in theirs." He shrugged. "What matter? I will soon have them under my thumb again. Half the police and customs officers in France are Corsicans." Bond spent the next morning in his room at the Maison Rouge. He changed into his ski clothes and sent out for a pair of snow goggles and thin leather gloves, sufficient to give some protection to his hands, but close-fitting enough for the handling of his gun.
Then he got the fitting of the stitched pigskin holster comfortable inside the waistband of his trousers. He had his bill sent up and paid it, and ordered his suitcase to be forwarded on to Tracy at the 4 Jahreszeiten. When at exactly midday the telephone rang, he went straight down and out to the gray Peugeot 403 that he had been told to expect. The driver was Cheche. He acknowledged Bond's greeting curtly, and in silence they drove for an hour across the uninteresting countryside, finally turning left off a secondary road into a muddy lane that meandered through thick forest. On the edge of the trees was a large barn in good repair. They stepped outside, and Cheche sounded 3 shorts on his horn. A small door in the wide double doors of the bar opened, and Marc-Ange came out. He greeted Bond cheerfully. "Come in, my friend." Inside it was almost like a film set. Lights blazed down on the ungainly shape of the Army helicopter. The place seemed to be full of people. Bond recognized the faces of the Union men. The others were, he assumed, the local mechanics. 2 men on ladders were busily engaged painting red crosses on white backgrounds on the black painted fuselage of the machine, and the paint of the recognition letters, FL-BGS, presumably civilian and false, still glittered wetly. Bond was introduced to the pilot, a bright-eyed, fair-haired young man in overalls called Georges. "You will be sitting beside him," explained Marc-Ange. "He is a good navigator, but he doesn't know the last stretch up the valley, and he has never heard of Piz Gloria. You had better go over the maps with him after some food." He laughed cheerfully. Bond accepted a foot of garlic sausage, a hunk of bread, and a bottle of wine, and sat on an upturned packing case while Marc-Ange went back to supervising the loading of the Schmeisser submachine guns and 6-inch square packets in red oilcloth. In due course, Marc-Ange lined up his team, including Bond, and carried out a quick inspection of sidearms, which, in the case of the Union men, included well-used flick knives. The men, as well as Marc-Ange, were clothed in brand-new ski clothes of gray cloth. Marc-Ange handed to all of them armbands in black cloth, bearing the neatly stitched words Bundesalpenpolizei. When Marc-Ange gave Bond his, he commented, "There is no such force as the Federal Police of the Alps, but I doubt if our Spectre friends will know that. At least the armbands will make an important first impression." Marc-Ange looked at his watch. He turned and called out in French, "2:45 already? Then let us roll." The farm tractor attached to the wheelbase of the helicopter started up. The gates of the barn were thrown wide, and the great metal insect moved slowly out to the grassland under the pale winter sun. The tractor was uncoupled, and the pilot, followed by Bond, climbed up the little aluminium ladder and then into the raised cockpit and strapped themselves in. The engine fired healthily, and the great blades began to turn. The helicopter trembled, unwilling to leave the earth, but then came a slight jerk, and they were off. They reached 2,000 feet, and the pilot held it, skirting the town to the north. Now there came a crackle of static over Bond's earphones, and Swiss Air Control asked them politely to identify themselves. The pilot said, "Helicopter of the Red Cross flying blood plasma to Italy." The radio went dead. Another voice with more authority to it spoke in French. "What is your destination?" "Wait," said the pilot. "I have it here. A moment, please." After minutes, he said, "FL-BGS reporting. My destination is Ospedale Santa Monica at Bellinzona." The radio again went dead, only to come to life 5 minutes later. FL-BGS, we have no record of your identification symbol. Please explain. "Your registration manual must be out of date. The aircraft was commissioned only 1 month ago." Now Zurich lay ahead, and the silver boomerang of the Zürichsee. Now Zurich Airport came on the air. They must have been listening to Swiss Air Control. FL-BGS. Yes, what is it now?" "You have infringed the Civil Airlines channel. Land and report to flying control. I repeat, land and report." The pilot became indignant. "What do you mean, land and report?
Have you no comprehension of human suffering? This is a mercy flight carrying blood plasma of a rare category. You tell me to land and report when a life is at stake? Do you wish to be responsible for murder?
This outburst gave them peace until they'd passed the Zurichsee. Bond chuckled. He gave a thumbs-up sign to the pilot. But then Federal Air Control at Bern came on the air, and a deep, resonant voice said,
FLBGS, FLBGS, who gave you clearance? I repeat, who gave you clearance for your flight?
You did.
Records were hastily checked in Bern, and the somber voice came over to them again. It was extremely polite but firm.
FLBGS, we have no record at Federal Air Control of your proposed flight. I regret, but you are transgressing Swiss airspace. Unless you can give further authority for your flight, kindly return to Zurich and report to flying control.
The pilot spoke angrily into his mouthpiece.
Federal Air Control, this is FLBGS. For further information, contact International Red Cross at Geneva. I am just a pilot. If you have lost the papers, that is not my fault. I repeat, check with Geneva.
The voice came back, but now more faintly because of the mountains.
Who are your passengers?
The pilot played his trump card.
Representatives of the world's press, they have been listening to all this nonsense coming from the home of the famous International Red Cross. I wish you happy reading of your newspapers at breakfast time tomorrow, gentlemen. And now, a little peace, yes? And please record in your logbooks that I am not, repeat, not, the Soviet Air Force invading Switzerland.
There was silence. Ahead were the great peaks. Yes, there was the bloody place. Now only the peak was golden. The plateau and the buildings were in indigo shadow, soon to be lit by the full moon. Bond pointed. As the pilot turned to port in towards the face of the mountain, his radio crackled sharply, and a harsh voice said in German and then in French,
Landing forbidden. This is private property. I repeat, landing forbidden.
The pilot reached up to the cockpit roof and switched off the radio. He had studied his landing point on the plateau on the mock-up. He got to it, hovered, and gently came down. The helicopter bounced once on its rubber floats and settled. Already there was a group of men waiting for them, 8 men. Bond recognized some of them. They all had their hands in their pockets or in their wind jackets. The engine coughed to a stop, and the rotor swung round briefly in neutral and halted. Bond heard the bang of the door being opened behind him and the rattle of the men piling down the ladder. The two groups lined up facing each other. Marquand said with authority, "This is the Federal Police Alpine Patrol. There was trouble up here on Christmas Eve. We have come to investigate." Fritz, the head waiter, said angrily, "The local police have already been here. They have made their report. All is in order. Please leave at once." "What is the Federal Police Alpine Patrol? I've never heard of it." The pilot nudged Bond and pointed over to the left, to the building that housed the Count and the laboratories. A man, clumsy in bobsleigh helmet and padding, was running down the path towards the cable station. Bond leaned out of the door and shouted, "The big one! He's getting away!" As Bond jumped, one of the Spectre men shouted, "Der Engländer! Der Spion!" And then as Bond started running away to the right, weaving and dodging, all hell broke loose. There came the boom of heavy automatics as the Spectre team got off their first rounds, and bullets, tracer, flashed past Bond with the noise of hummingbirds' wings. Then came the answering roar of the Schmeissers, and Bond was left alone. Now he was round the corner of the club, and 100 yards down the slope, the man in the crash helmet had torn open the door of the garage for the bobsleighs in the foundations of the cable station. He emerged carrying a one-man skeleton bobsled, holding it in front of him as a shield. He fired a burst from a heavy automatic at Bond, and again the hummingbirds whirred past. Bond knelt, and steadying his gun with 2 hands, fired 3 rounds with his Walther. But the man was now running to the glistening ice mouth of the Glory Express bob run. Even as Bond ran on down the slope, the man had flung himself down on his skeleton and had disappeared as if swallowed up by the glistening landscape. Bond got to the garage. Damn! They were all 6-men or 2-men models. No, there was one skeleton at the back. Bond hauled it out.
No time to see if the runners were straight, the steering arm shifting easily. He ran to the start and hurled himself under the protecting chain in a mad forward dive. He gripped the steering arm, keeping his elbows well into his sides. He was already going like hell down the dark blue gutter. He tried braking with the toes of both his boots. Damn little difference. There was this lateral straight across the shoulder of the mountain, then a big banked curve. Bond kept his right shoulder down and inched right on the steering arm. Even so, he went perilously near the top edge of the bank before he dived down into the dark gully again. Then the shadows camouflaged a sharp dip. Bond left the ground and flew. The crash of his landing almost knocked the wind out of his body. He frantically dug his toes into the ice, managed to get down from perhaps 50 miles per hour to 40, but now, flashing towards him in silver and black, came an S-bend. The toes of Bond's boots slid maddeningly on the black ice. Under his nose he could see the parallel tracks of Blofeld's runners, and between them the grooves of his toe spikes. The old fox. As soon as he heard the helicopter, he must have got himself fixed for his only escape route. Ahead, flashing through a patch of moonlight, was the other body, Blofeld. Bond took a chance, heaved himself up on one hand, and reached down for his gun. The wind tried to tear him off the bob, but he had the gun. He opened his mouth wide and gripped the gun between his teeth, flexed the ice-caked leather on his right hand. Then he got the gun in his right hand, lifted his toes off the ice, and went like hell. But now the man had disappeared into the shadows, and a giant bank reared up ahead. Bond dug his toes in, got a glimpse of an ice wall ahead, and to the left, and in a flash was climbing it, straight up. God, in a split second he would be over the edge. Bond hammered in his right boot and lurched his body to the right, tearing at the steering arm. Reluctantly, the sliver of aluminium answered, and Bond, inches from the top of the wall, found himself swooping down into blackness and then out again onto a moonlit straight. Only 50 yards ahead was the flying figure, with chips of ice fountaining up from the breaking spikes on his boots. Bond held his breath and got off 2 shots. He thought they were good ones, but now the man had gone into shadow again. But Bond was gaining. His lips drew back from his teeth in an almost animal snarl. "You bastard, I'm coming after you like lightning. Soon I shall only be 5 yards behind you, and then you'll have had it." But the shadows concealed another hazard, long transverse waves in the ice. Bond crashed from one to the next, felt his boots being almost torn from his feet as he tried to brake, nearly lost his gun, felt his stomach flatten against his spine with each shattering impact. He felt his rib cage almost cracking, but then it was over, and Bond sucked in air through his clenched teeth. Now for a length of straight. But what was that ahead on the track? It was something black, something the size of a big lemon that was bouncing along gaily like a child's rubber ball. He was gaining on the gaily bouncing thing, flashing down on it. It was a grenade! Bond, sick in the stomach, lifted his toes and let himself go. The only hope was to pray to God and race it. The next thing Bond knew was that the whole track had blown up in his face, and that he and his skeleton Bob were flying through the air. He landed in soft snow with the skeleton on top of him and passed out like a light. Later, Bond was to estimate that he lay there only a matter of minutes. It was a tremendous explosion from the mountain above him that brought him staggering to his feet, up to his belly in snow. He looked vaguely up to where it had come from. It must have been the club building going up, because now there was the glare of flames and a tower of smoke that rose towards the moon. There came the echoing crack of another explosion, and Blofeld's block disintegrated, great chunks of it crashing down the mountainside, turning themselves into giant snowballs that bounded off down towards the tree line. And now the station went up, and Bond stared fascinated as the great wires, their tension released, came hissing and snaking down the mountain towards him. There was nothing he could do about it but stand and watch. If they cut him down, they cut him down. But they lashed past in the snow, wrapped themselves briefly around the tall pylon above the tree line, tore it away in a metallic crackling, and disappeared over the edge of the shoulder. Bond ached all over, but there didn't seem to be anything broken. He bent dazedly to the twisted remains of the skeleton. The steering arm had gone, and both runners were bent.
There were a lot of rattles from the rivets, but perhaps the damn thing would run. It had bloody well got to. There was no other way for Bond to get down the mountain. His gun? On the hell, of course. Wearily, Bond heaved himself over the wall of the track and slid carefully down, clutching the remains of his skeleton. As soon as he got to the bottom of the gutter, everything began to slip downwards, but he managed to haul himself onto the bob and get shakily going. In fact, the bent runners were a blessing, and the bob scraped slowly down, leaving great furrows in the ice. There were more turns, more hazards, but at a bare 10 miles an hour. They were child's play, and soon Bond was through the tree line and into the finishing straight, where he slowly came to a halt. He left the skeleton where it stopped and scrambled over the low ice wall. Here the snow was beaten hard by spectators' feet, and he stumbled slowly along. There were no lights on in the station, into which the cables now trailed limply along the ground. He then heard the clatter of an engine high up in the mountains, and in a moment the helicopter crossed the moon and disappeared down the valley. Bond smiled to himself. They were going to have a tough time arguing themselves across Swiss airspace this time, but Marc-Ange had thought out an alternative route over Germany. That would also not be fun. They would have to argue the toss with NATO. And now, up the road from Samaden, that Bond knew so well, came the iron hee-haw warning of the local fire engine. The blinking red light on its roof was perhaps a mile away. Bond, carefully approaching the corner of the darkened cable station, prepared his story. He crept up to the wall of the building and looked round. Nobody. No trace except the fresh tire marks outside the entrance door. Blofeld must have telephoned his man down here before he started and used him in his car for the getaway. Which way had he gone? Bond walked out onto the road. The tracks turned left. Blofeld would be at the Bernina Pass, or over it by now, on his way down into Italy and away. The shining red vehicle pulled up in front of the cable station, and the warning klaxons ran down with an iron groan. Men jumped to the ground. A man in a peaked cap came up to Bond and saluted. He fired off a torrent of Schweizerdeutsch. Bond shook his head. The man tried French. Bond again showed incomprehension. Another man with fragmentary English was called over. "What is it that is happening?" he asked. Bond shook his head dazedly. "I don't know. I was walking down from Pontresina to Samaden. I came on a day excursion from Zurich and missed my bus. I was going to take a train from Samaden. Then I saw these explosions up the mountain." He waved vaguely. "And I walked up there, past the station to see better. The next thing I knew was a bang on the head and being dragged along the path." "There is nothing we can do here. It will need a helicopter from the mountain rescue team. We must go back to Samaden and report. You wish to come?" "I certainly do," said Bond enthusiastically, and with many politenesses and no question of why he should attempt the icy walk to Samaden in the dark instead of taking a taxi, he was borne comfortably to Samaden and dropped off, with the warmest gestures of goodwill and sympathy, at the railway station. Tracy gazed at him wide-eyed when she met him outside passport control at Munich airport, but she waited until they were inside the little Lancia before she burst into tears. "What have they been doing to you?" she said through her sobs. Bond took her in his arms. "It's all right, Tracy. I promise you. These are only cuts and bruises like a bad ski fall. Now, don't be a goose. They could happen to anyone." She said, "It's so silly, but I knew you were up to no good. As soon as you said you were going off for a few days to clean up something instead of coming to me, I knew you were going to get into more trouble. And now Marc-Ange has telephoned and asked me if I've seen you. He was very mysterious and sounded worried. And when I said I hadn't, he just rang off. And now there's this story in the papers about Peace Gloria. I knew it all tied up," she added fiercely. "The way you go on playing Red Indians. It is so selfish." Bond reached out and pressed her hand on the wheel. The little car wove expertly through the traffic. Bond said, "I'm sorry, Tracy. It was something that had to be done. You know how it is. I just couldn't back out of it. I really wouldn't have been happy here like I am now if I'd shirked it. You do see that, don't you?" She reached out and touched his cheek.
I wouldn't love you if you weren't a pirate. I expect it's in the blood. I'll get used to it." She gave him a fleeting smile. "The vault with the story in it is behind the seat on the floor." Bond laughed at her mind-reading. "Damn you, Tracy!" He reached for the paper. He had been aching to see what it said, how much had come out. There it was, down the central gutter between the first lead, inevitably on Berlin, and the second, equally inevitably, on the miracle of the latest German export figures. All that said, "From our correspondent, Dateline San Moritz," was "Mysterious explosions on Piz Gloria. Cable railway to Millionaires Resort destroyed." Then a few lines repeating the content of the headings and saying that the police would investigate by helicopter in the morning. The next headline caught Bond's eye. "In England, polio scare." And then, Dateline the day before, from London, a brief dispatch. The 9 girls held at various British airports on suspicion of having had contact with a possible polio carrier at Zurich Airport, also an English girl, are still being held in quarantine. A Ministry of Health representative said that this was purely a routine precaution. A 10th girl, the origin of the scare, a Miss Violet O'Neill, is under observation at Shannon Hospital. She is a native of Eire. Bond smiled to himself and tossed the paper over his shoulder. So the case was closed, the assignment over. But still, the big one had got away. They got to the hotel at about 3 o'clock. There was a message for Tracy to call Marc-Ange at the Maison Rouge at Strasbourg. They went up to her room and got through. Tracy said, "Here he is, Papa, and almost in one piece." She handed the receiver to Bond. Marc-Ange said,
Did you get him?
"No, damn it. He's in Italy now. At least I think he is. That was the way he went. How did you get on? It looked fine from down below."
Satisfactory? All accounted for?
"Gone?"
Yes, gone for good. There was no trace of your men from Zurich. I lost 2. Our friend had left a surprise in his filing cabinet. That accounted for Cheche. Another one wasn't quick enough, that is all. The trip back was entertaining. I will give you the details tomorrow. I shall travel tonight in my sleeping car, you know?
"Yes. By the way, what about the girlfriend Irma?"
There was no sign of her. Just as well. It would have been difficult to send her away like the others.
"Yes. Well, thanks, Marc-Ange. And the news from England is also good. See you tomorrow." Bond put down the receiver. Tracy had discreetly retired to the bathroom and locked the door. She now called, "Can I come out?" "2 minutes, darling." Bond got on to Station M. His call was expected. He arranged to visit the head of station, a man he knew slightly, called Lieutenant Commander Savage, in an hour's time. He released Tracy, and they made plans for the evening. Then he went along to his room. His suitcase had been unpacked, and there was a bowl of crocuses beside his bed. Then he had a quick shower, changed out of his stinking ski clothes into the warmer of the 2 dark blue suits he had brought with him, sat down at the writing desk, and jotted down the headings of what he would have to put on the teleprinter to M. "I do." James Bond said the words at 10:30 in the next morning on a crystal-clear New Year's Day in the British Consul General's drawing room. And he meant them. The papers were signed, and the head of Station M, who had agreed to act as Bond's best man and who was secretly longing to write a sensational note to the head of his London section about all this, produced a handful of confetti and threw most of it over Marc-Ange, who had turned up in a full suit of very French tails. The farewells were said, and Bond submitted himself. He swore for the last time to Marc-Ange's embraces, and they went down the steps to the waiting lancha. Someone, Bond suspected the consul's wife, had tied white ribbons from the corners of the windscreen to the grill of the radiator, and there was a small group of bystanders, passers-by, who had stopped, as they do all over the world, to see who it was and what they looked like. The Consul General shook Bond by the hand. "I'm afraid we haven't managed to keep this as private as you would have liked. A woman reporter came on from the Münchener Illustrierte this morning. Wouldn't say who she was. Gossip writer, I suppose. I had to give her the bare facts. She particularly wanted to know the time of the ceremony, if you can call it that, so that they could send a cameraman along. At least you've been spared that. All still tight, I suppose. Well, so long, and the best of luck."
Tracy, who had elected to go away in a dark gray Tyroler outfit with the traditional dark green trimmings and staghorn buttons, climbed in and pressed the starter. The engine purred and then roared softly as she went through the gears down the empty street. They both waved one hand out of a window, and there was a small flutter of answering hands from the pavement, and then they were round the corner and away. When they found the Autobahn exit for Salzburg and Kufstein, Bond said, "Be an angel and pull into the side, Tracy. I simply must get out and take down these ribbons. I can't stand looking like a coronation. Do you mind?" She laughed. "You like being anonymous. I want everyone to cheer as we go by. I know you're going to have this car sprayed gray or black as soon as you get a chance. That's all right. But nothing's going to stop me wearing you like a flag from now on. Will you sometimes feel like wearing me like a flag?" On all holidays and feast days. Bond got out and removed the ribbons. He looked up at the cloudless sky. The sun felt warm on his face. He said, "Do you think we'd be too cold if we took the roof down?" "No, let's. We can only see afterward with it up, and it's a lovely drive from here to Kitzbühel. We can always put it up again if we want to." Bond unscrewed the 2 butterfly nuts and folded the canvas top back behind the seats. He had a look up and down the Autobahn. There was plenty of traffic. At the big Shell station on the roundabout they had just passed, his eye was caught by a bright red open Maserati being tanked up. Fast job. And a typical sporty couple, a man and a woman in the driving seat, white dust coats and linen helmets buttoned under the chin, big dark green talc goggles that obscured most of the rest of the faces. Usual German speedster's uniform. Too far away to see if they were good-looking enough for the car, but the silhouette of the woman wasn't promising. Bond got in beside Tracy, and they set off again down the beautifully landscaped road. They didn't talk much. Tracy kept at about 80, and there was wind roar. That was the trouble about open cars. Bond glanced at his watch. 11:45. They would get to Kufstein at about 1. Tracy turned into the right-hand fork leading to the underpass for Kufstein, and they were at once through Rosenheim, and the great white peaks were immediately ahead. The traffic was much sparser now, and there were kilometers where theirs was the only car on the road that arrowed away between white meadows and larch copses, towards the glittering barrier where blood had been shed between warring armies for centuries. Bond glanced behind him. Miles away down the great highway was a speck of red. The Maserati? They certainly hadn't got much competitive spirit if they couldn't catch the Lancia at 80. No good having a car like that if you didn't drive it so as to lose all other traffic in your mirror. Perhaps he was doing them an injustice. Perhaps they too only wanted to motor quietly along and enjoy the day. 10 minutes later, Tracy said, "There's a red car coming up fast behind. Do you want me to lose him?" "No," said Bond. "Let him go. We've got all the time in the world." Now he could hear the rasping whine of the 8 cylinders. He leaned over to the left and jerked a laconic thumb forwards, waving the Maserati past. The whine changed to a shattering roar. The windscreen of the Lancia disappeared as if hit by a monster fist. Bond caught a glimpse, the flash illuminator of some automatic gun being withdrawn, and then the red car was past, and the Lancia was going like hell off the verge, across a stretch of snow, and smashing a path through a young copse. Then Bond's head crashed into the windscreen frame, and he was out. When he came to, a man in the khaki uniform of the Autobahn patrol was shaking him. The young face was stark with horror. "Was ist denn geschehen? Was ist denn geschehen?" Bond turned towards Tracy. She was lying forward with her face buried in the ruins of the steering wheel. Her pink handkerchief had come off, and the belt of golden hair hung down and hid her face. Bond put his arm round her shoulders, across which the dark patches had begun to flower. He pressed her against him. He looked up at the young man and smiled his reassurance. "It's all right," he said in a clear voice, as if explaining something to a child. "It's quite all right. She's having a rest. We'll be going on soon. There's no hurry, you see." Bond's head sank down against hers, and he whispered into her hair, "You see, we've got all the time in the world." The young patrolman took a last scared look at the motionless couple, hurried over to his motorcycle, picked up the hand microphone, and began talking urgently to the rescue headquarters. We hope you have enjoyed our presentation of On Her Majesty's Secret Service by Ian Fleming. Copyright 1963 by Glidrose Productions Limited, and performance copyright 1997 by Brilliance Corporation, all rights reserved. No part of this recording may be played for an audience or reproduced in any form without written permission. Address all inquiries to Brilliance Corporation, P.O. Box 887, Grand Haven, Michigan, 49417.